Ted, Ted, Ted. A child's mind in an adult head. Read, read, read. He built his name, fulfilling that need. Ted, Ted, Ted. It took some time to build his name. Book, book, book. Over 60 in all he wrote, and no two the same. And yes, we are talking about a Ted today. Theodore Seuss Geisel, a.k.a. Dr. Seuss. A man who once wrote, "I don't write for children, I write for people." Once a writer starts talking down to kids, he's lost. Kids can pick up on that kind of thing. Ted Geisel published over 60 books throughout his career, cementing himself as one of the most, if not the most, beloved children's authors in history along the way. Since 1937, generations of children have fallen in love with reading, in large part because of Dr. Seuss books. Geisel's works have captured the attention of young readers for decades, with their short, engaging rhymes and colorful, unique characters. His works, which have collectively sold over 600 million copies worldwide, have also earned numerous awards, which is pretty funny when you consider that Geisel never set out to be a children's author. It was certainly not a lifelong dream. In fact, he wanted to be an English professor, but then he found that post-grad studies just were not for him. And more importantly, he found a supportive, encouraging partner who gave him the courage to pursue what he was truly talented at, drawing strange characters and assigning stranger names and stories to them. It was his wife who convinced him to pursue a full-time career as a cartoonist, and he got his start writing and drawing for a weekly satirical magazine you've probably never heard of, and masterminding a wildly popular national ad campaign for an insecticide that no longer exists. When he finally set out to publish his first children's book, he faced 27 straight rejections before a publisher finally decided to take a chance on him. And only then because a former classmate had just gotten a job working for that publisher, and Ted just happened to almost literally run into that classmate. And even then, he still didn't become a household literary name overnight. It took years. Dr. Seuss's writing career grew slowly and steadily until the 1950s, when he wrote his first book that went viral in a sense. And then he and his wife turned his brand into a business empire that has stood the test of time. This week, we will discuss the early life of Ted Geisel, the first use of his famous pen name, how he got his start as an author, how he and some of his works ended up in the crosshairs of so-called cancel culture, and we'll learn how Dr. Seuss became a household name in this Thing 1 and Thing 2, 7-Hump-Wump, Whoville, Yertle the Turtle, Don't Let the Grinch Steal Your Christmas edition of Timesuck.
This is Michael McDonald, and you're listening to Timesuck.
You're listening to Timesuck.
Well, happy Monday, and welcome back to the Cult of the Curious. I'm Dan Cummins, the Suckmaster, nasty, nasty boy, purveyor of low-budget horror, moral deviant, and you are listening to Timesuck. Hail Nimrod, hail Lucifina, praise be to good boy Bojangles, and glory be to Triple M. One quick charity announcement, and then it's Seuss o'clock. This month, we were able to donate $11,620 to Farm Rescue, which is the only nonprofit organization of its kind providing farm and ranch families with the operational support they need in times of crisis. Farm Rescue sees a world where family farms and ranches can thrive for generations to come. We also added $1,290 to the scholarship fund. Learn more about Farm Rescue by visiting farmrescue.org. Hail Nimrod, and thank you to all of our space lizards for allowing us to make that donation. And now, let's get back into this topic. Today, we'll kick off this Knox and Box, Fox and Socks extravaganza with a brief overview of how Dr. Seuss influenced the children's book industry before diving into a full timeline of his life and Slow Joe Crow sewing whose clothes? Sue's clothes career. For many decades, teachers gave early readers and beginning readers a text called basal readers or primers. A famous example of early reading primers are the Dick and Jane series of books. You know, stuff like Dick said, look, look up, up. Jane said, run, Dick, run and see. Remember those? I do. I remember those being around as a kid, and I think reading a few to my kids. Side note on the Dick and Jane series of books, they were created by Zerna Sharp and William Gray in 1930, and I know that was a long time ago, and that language changes. But those two had to have known they were sneaking in some passages that would be interpreted by some as being sexual in some of those old books. I mean, didn't they? I mean, come on. Check out these excerpts. I'm not making these up. Starting with a story that includes their cat Puff. Come, baby. Look up, baby. Look up and see Puff. Look up and see Dick. See Dick go up. See Dick go up, up, up. Oh, Jane. See Dick come down. This next one's even more ridiculous. Jane said, "Oh, Dick, I cannot find the balls." Come, Dick, come. Come and find the balls. I mean, come on. They were giggling when they snuck some of that shit in there, weren't they? Or were they totally oblivious? Was it just a different time? Do I just have a dirty mind? Is it totally fine for Jane to want Dick to come and find the balls? Anyway, these primers were written based on the theory that beginning readers learned new words by associating them with pictures and memorizing them through repetition. But by the mid-1950s, this whole word or look and say method was facing pushback from proponents of phonics-based instruction. Oh, phonics. That's another method to teach reading and writing to beginners. You remember the old hooked on phonics worked for me? Those commercials, they went on for fucking decades.
Hooked on phonics worked for me.
Call 1-800-ABCDEFG.
Hooked on phonics worked for me. Phonics teaches the relationship between the sounds of language called phonemes and the letters called graphemes. Phonics can be used with any writing system that's alphabetic. It teaches the, quote, building blocks of reading. Starting in the 19th century until the 1970s, the term phonics was originally used as a synonym for phonetics, the study and classification of speech sounds. The phonics principle was actually first formally presented by English educator John Hart way back in 1570 CE. Before phonics, children learned to read with the ABC method, where they recited letters from each word of a familiar text, which in the Western world was primarily the Bible. Hart suggested that when it came to learning how to read, the focus should be on the relationship between graphemes and phonemes. There's still debate today amongst educators about the best way to teach young minds to read, or I guess just minds in general, but currently phonics seems to be the most widely accepted approach. No one wants Jane to make Dick come anymore for some reason. Here in the U.S. in 2000, a government-formed national reading panel examined the research and declared phonics crucial to young readers. This led to a truce between the two schools of thought called balanced literacy, which borrowed from both approaches with the goal of getting kids to read enjoyable books as quickly as possible. Researchers are constantly studying the science of reading, which refers to research relating to how a child's brain learns to read. And the current science calls for educators to focus on the building blocks of words. For young students, this starts with rhyming games or clapping out syllables of a word. See Dick go up. See Jane come. See Dick come. See Dick make Jane come. See Jane make Dick come. See Dick go down. Oh, you get it. Students might also be asked to sound out, quote, nonsense words, such as those featured so prominently in Dr. Seuss novels. With colorful pictures, short sentences, and plenty of rhymes, Dr. Seuss books have become a key resource for early readers. Back in the 1950s, critics pointed out that the Dick and Jane books were boring and overly repetitive with bland illustrations. And also, there's probably way too fucking much come and ball talk. Oh, Dick, I cannot find the balls. Come, Dick, come and find the balls. Enough, Jane, enough. Put your bicycle in the garage already. Stop begging Dick to ride it. But they really did find them boring. I mean, other than a few passages you can giggle at if you interpret them sexually, they are painfully boring. And the illustrations somehow more boring than the words. Dr. Seuss, who by the 50s was a well-respected children's author, was asked by William Spalding, then the director of Houghton Mifflin's educational division, to write an engaging first-grade primer. Spalding was concerned about the difficulty many children were having when it came to learning to read. Ted was tasked with being restricted to a list of 350 pre-approved vocabulary words supplied by, textbook publisher Houghton Mifflin. The challenge was tough. Writing a book that excited first graders in 225 words or less, and not leaning on a bunch of Dick and Balls and Jane cum talk. Out of those 350 pre-approved words, Ted was not to use more than 225 of them. Very challenging amount of words to tell a complete story with. He would end up using only 223 in a story that was only 1,621 total words long. For comparison, My notes for a typical episode of Timesuck clock in at between 27,000 and 32,000 words. To be fair, 5 to 10,000 of those words are unnecessary profanity and or stupid jokes. Each story of the fictional Nightmare Fuel episodes over on the Scared to Death feed that I write tend to land somewhere between 10,000 and 12,000 words. So he would tell a story in 1,600 words. Ted spent months looking over the word list, trying to figure out how to piece some semblance of a story together. At one point, he said to himself, "If I find two words that rhyme and make sense to me, that's the title." The words cat and hat caught his eye. Guessing you can see where this is going. He rewrote the story over several more months before he delivered his final The Cat in the Hat manuscript. Biographer Brian J. Jones wrote about this book. With its likable and somewhat subversive main character, galloping verse, and deliberate sense of humor, The Cat in the Hat was everything that Dick and Jane was not. Jones continued, and yet Geisel had not exactly flouted the prevailing pedagogical approach. He turned some of its defects into merits. The stultifying repetitions of the typical primer had been replaced with joyously musical ones. Some of the cat's most comically absurd escapades are entirely consistent with the look and say method. On the other hand, with its reliance on memorable rhyming pairs and word families, The Cat in the Hat, beginning with its catchy title, accentuated for early readers how sound and symbol correspond. The book served as a gateway to the phonics-based approach, which eventually supplanted the whole word pedagogy. The Cat in the Hat stirred up a revolution in reading instruction, according to the New Yorker. It went playground viral, right? Kids on playgrounds talking about it to their friends, and their parents end up buying the books for them. Adorable. So as fast as I could, I went after my net, and I said, with my net, I can get them, I bet. I bet with my net, I can get those things yet. Then I let down my net, it came down with a plop, and I had them, at last. Those two things had to stop. Then I said to the cat, now you do as I say. You pack up those things, and you take them away. Oh dear, said the cat, you did not like our game. Oh dear, what a shame, what a shame, what a shame. This silly and super fun book about that darn rascally, troublesome cat. Sold more than 1,000 copies per day for years after it first went on sale March 12, 1957, and was on its way to selling 250,000 copies by Christmas of 1957. Within 3 years, it had sold over 3 million copies. By 2017, it had sold over 16 million copies, selling another 500,000 copies a year since. The Cat in the Hat was the book that truly made writing a full-time, lifelong, and lucrative career for Dr. Seuss. One of his most famous quotes was, I feel my greatest accomplishment was getting rid of Dick and Jane and encouraging students to approach reading as a pleasure, not a chore. By now, the guy who never set out to be the author of books for children was incredibly passionate about children's literature. As Ted Geisel wrote for a 1960 LA Times editorial, children's reading and children's thinking are the rock-bottom base upon which this country will rise, or not rise. In these days of tension and confusion, books for children have a greater potential for good or evil than any other form of literature on earth. Interesting take. Right? A nation's children's learning to read, so incredibly important. If you can't read, if you don't have that base, you will be seriously limited in what types of jobs you will be able to attain. You'll be limited very much so in what kinds of media, what type of information you're able to digest, receive, absorb, for work or social or self-enrichment or leisure reasons. You're dependent on having information about the world around you shared to you by someone else who can read. Changes a lot of things. Although he was passionate about children's literacy, Dr. Seuss told an interviewer late in life, I'd like to say I got into children's books because I had a burning passion, a great message to bring to the youth of the world. But it was because I was going nuts. Yeah, the reality was he was sick of the other work he was doing. He wanted to focus on his drawings he'd been doodling since he was a little kid. He wanted to share his own stories, not work on the creative ideas for others in primarily ad campaigns. Okay, with some context established, let's now begin this timeline to see how exactly Ted Geisel became Dr. Seuss, the author that has entertained generations of children. Let's find out why he felt like he was going nuts. Go, go, go into the timeline where we watch our knowledge grow. Dates, dates, dates. What fascinating trivia in life awaits. Stop, stop, stop. Why am I stalling? When will it start? Drop, drop, drop into the timeline with a curious heart.
Strap on those boots, soldier. We're marching down a Timesuck timeline.
Theodore Seuss Geisel was born on March 2nd, 1904, in the city of Springfield, Massachusetts. The actual German pronunciation of Seuss rhymes with the word voice, Seuss, but the American pronunciation rhymes with the word juice, Seuss. According to biographer Brian J. Jones's book, Becoming Dr. Seuss, the main source for this timeline, Springfield has been nurturing and stirring American imaginations for nearly 300 years. American independence was won with the reliable ammunition and gun carriages produced by the Springfield Armory beginning in 1777. A decade later, Daniel Shays, spouting a different kind of idealism, would attempt to steal muskets and ammunition from the same armory in a thwarted attempt to overthrow the government of Massachusetts. By 1795, Springfield Armory would regularly be producing the muskets that would be carried on the shoulders of American soldiers all the way through the War of 1812 and on into the Civil War. Springfield, a city of just over 150,000 people today, almost exactly 700,000 in its metro area, has been home to many influential people over the years. Local businessmen Horace Smith and Daniel B. Wesson, founders of the famous gun company Smith & Wesson, had roots in Springfield, as well as Charles Goodyear, who discovered and patented the process for making vulcanized rubber in a Springfield factory in 1944. One can never have enough vulcanized rubber. And now the most famous blimps in the world bear his name. In 1843, Springfield brothers Charles and George Merriam acquired the rights to publish Noah Webster's An American Dictionary of the English Language. Then in 1891, Canadian-born physical education teacher James Naismith was looking for a way to keep his students busy during the long New England winters. He put a peach basket on a 10-foot-high pole in the gym at the local International YMCA training school and named his new game Squid Game, or basketball. Loved Squid Game Season 2, by the way. And that's why the Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame is located in Springfield today. Ted's grandfather, Theodore Adolf Geisel, born in July of 1844 in the village of Mühlhausen, right in the heart of modern Germany. Today it's a bit more than a village with almost 40,000 people. Don't seem to run across a lot of people with Adolf for a first or middle name anymore. Wonder why that is. T.A. Geisel moved south to the village of Pforzheim, now a city of almost 130,000, known as the Gateway to the Black Forest, at the age of just 14, to complete a 6-year apprenticeship with a local jeweler. Man. He then joined the German cavalry and served in the German army during the 7-week Austro-Prussian War of 1866, and then not long after that, he would leave Germany behind. In 1869, 25-year-old T.A. boarded the steamship Ohio and moved to the United States. His extended family helped him get a job at a jewelry store in Springfield, Massachusetts. 2 years later, in 1871, T.A. would marry Christine Schmazel, a fellow German immigrant, and he became an American citizen 4 years later in 1875. He was known as a talented jeweler in Springfield and was apparently the go-to man for brooches. If you lived in the New England area and you needed a fucking brooch, you were a goddamn fool if you didn't go to T.A. Geisel. Right, you hear me? A fool! Despite his success. In 1876, T.A. abandoned the jewelry business to start a new career as a brewer. He pooled his resources with the brewer's apprentice named Christian Kalmbach, and purchased a small brick plant in town. The facility initially only produced about 1,000 barrels each year, but the two young businessmen were ambitious, dreamed of expansion, and then pursued that dream aggressively. T.A. helped turn the brewery into one of the largest in the region. On June 28, 1879, T.A. and his wife celebrated the birth of their fourth child and their first son, Theodore Robert Geisel. They would have 2 more surviving children over the next decade, but as the first son, T.R., was expected to take over the brewery. The brewery expanded during T.R.'s early childhood, eventually producing 1,000 barrels a day. Quite a jump up from a production of 1,000 barrels a year. And then by 1893, Kalmbach and Geisel were producing over 400,000 barrels of beer annually. And then T.A. bought his partner out, renamed the business Highland Brewing Company, made himself president, treasurer, and manager. 5 years later, Highland Brewing was sold and incorporated with 7 local companies to form the Springfield Breweries Company. T.A. still worked and insisted on managing his Highland facility, and he wanted to have 19-year-old T.R. hired on as treasurer of the entire organization. By 1901, T.A. was able to buy his business back. He made T.R. his partner in the Liberty Brewing Company and appointed him as both treasurer and secretary. And at this time, T.R. was seeing 23-year-old Henrietta Seuss, a baker's daughter. Nettie was a first-generation German-American. She had been born on May 13th, 1878. Her parents were George and Margarita Seuss, who had immigrated from Bavaria and established a bakery in Springfield. They were very active in the city's German community, and George Seuss was a founder of the Springfield Turnverein, a social club and gym frequented by the area's Germans. Nettie had been working at her family's downtown bakery since she was 15. She'd even skipped going to college out of loyalty to her family and the business. According to biographer Brian Jones, TR and Nettie made an attractive, if somewhat intimidating couple. Both were 6 feet tall and athletic in build. Nettie, a dark-haired beauty, weighed nearly 200 pounds, was an expert diver, and in a town that took marksmanship seriously, was a crack shot with a rifle. Like his father, TR was a dark-haired and dark-eyed young man with a regal bearing, also was an accomplished horseman, as well as one of the very best sharpshooters in the region. Sound like a real fucking warrior couple. Brienne of Tarth and the Mountain, if you know the references. Seems like both sets of parents might not have approved of their relationship. On August 31st, 1901, TR and Nettie snuck off to New York to get married. They eloped. They kept it secret for almost a year until the Springfield Republican leaked the news, reporting that, quote, the announcement was as much a surprise to their closest friends as to other. No one had been given an inkling of what happened. Nettie was visibly pregnant by the time the marriage was revealed in March of 1902. Their daughter, Margarita Christine Geisel, born July 4th, 1902, born on the 4th of July. A little less than 2 years later, their son Ted, the future Dr. Seuss, is born. Over a year later, the family then moves to 74 Fairfield Street in Springfield. Ted recalled that his parents hired a live-in nanny and housekeeper named Anna to help raise him, and apparently Ted quickly became terrified of Anna because she would lock him in her bedroom closet when he misbehaved. Locking a kid in the closet is fucking wild. Not sure how anyone could ever feel that's a fair thing to do to a kid. I feel like hog tying some out-of-control kid who just will not listen or behave is more humane than locking them in a dark closet. Another one of Ted's most vivid childhood memories involved a brown stuffed dog named Theophrastus, after the ancient Greek writer and philosopher. He kept Theophrastus his entire life. Wonder if Theo did some time with little Teddy in the dark closet. Another memory involved the death of his little sister Henrietta, who was born August 17th, 1906. Then she developed pneumonia and died just a little over a year later, December 19th, 1907. Ted would be forever haunted by the image of his sister's small casket inside their house. Ugh. Henrietta was his parents' last child, but Ted would grow up around a large extended family. They often gathered together for family dinners and parties on the weekends. Although Springfield had a small German community, less than 1% of the total population by 1910, they were a very active bunch. They hosted dress balls, gymnastics exhibitions, and a rifle club. Ted's family also honored their heritage by speaking German at home. His parents even attended a Lutheran church with services in German, although they were not overly devout. Brian Jones writes, but apart from its underlying morality, religion would always be more obligation than inspiration. Though as a child, Ted took an obvious delight in making up rhyming verses to remember the books of the Old Testament. One of those rhymes was, the great Jehovah speaks to us in Genesis and Exodus, Leviticus and Numbers 3, followed by Deuteronomy. Pretty cool to see the seeds for his later writing style be developed here. Ted also learned rhythmic chants from his mom. When putting her son to bed, she would chant out a list of daily pie flavors at the bakery. Apple, mince, lemon, peach, apricot, pineapple, blueberry, coconut, custard, and squash. I bet he got tickled when she would suddenly yell out, squash! Ted later would credit his mom for the rhythms in which I would write and the urgency with which I would do it. Reading was also a big pastime for the entire family. Their house was always full of books and newspapers. Ted would later say, and I love this, teaching a child to read is a family setup. It's the business of having books around the house, not forcing them. Parents should have 20 books stacked up on tables or set around the living room. The average kid will pick one up, find something interesting, and pretty soon, he's reading. I think that's so true. In a 1979 interview with Parents Magazine, Ted claimed he was reading Dickens by age 6. And maybe he was doing that. Maybe it wasn't quite by age 6. On his biography, Brian J. Jones writes that Ted had a tendency to exaggerate when telling stories about his life, and that he tended to add details, as the decades would progress. Ted had a distinct memory of children's books. He recalled reading The Brownies, their book, a book about spirits from English and Scottish folklore. and the book series Goops and How to Be Them. Ted would credit the Brownies for awakening his desire to draw. He also recalled how Arthur Winfield's Rover Boys novels, featuring 3 brothers who played pranks at a boarding school, made him want to read. His mom used those novels to bribe him into focusing on his piano lessons. That's awesome. I remember begging my mom for Hardy Boys books. Ted started kindergarten in the fall of 1908 at Summer Avenue School. Didn't have many memories of his elementary years and was, quote, typical if unexceptional student. He was more interested in playing with toys and his neighborhood friends than his studies. Pretty normal. Ted's parents were not cruel or strict disciplinarians. His father, TR, taught his son discipline and decency, though. Ted never understood his father's obsession with marksmanship, but he did come to understand the discipline and commitment it would take to perfect that skill. His dad taught him, whatever you do, do it to perfection, which is a good life lesson, right? Whatever you do, do it to the best of your ability. Take pride in what you do. I've talked to Kyler and Monroe a lot about that over the years. I wouldn't tell them perfection. I actually don't believe in perfection, but I do believe in the pursuit of it. All right, I do say that, the world would be a better place if we all truly cared about doing a good job, whatever that job might be. And I do think if you consistently try to get better, whatever your job is, and you do take pride in doing good work, you will attain some level of success. And it will be, whatever it is, it'll be more than what you would have attained otherwise, which I think makes it worth it, right? You'll definitely be further along. You'll be more successful than you would have been if you didn't care about the quality of your work and just phoned it in. Ted later always hung one of his dad's paper shooting targets with multiple bullseye shots in his office to remind him to stay committed to doing what it took to achieve excellence. In 1909, Ted Geisel was appointed to fill a vacancy on the board of Springfield's park system. He was put in charge of overseeing the Forest Park Zoo, a facility inside Springfield's Forest Park neighborhood that was home to alligators, monkeys, swans, lions, elk, and more. And now young Ted started spending Sunday afternoons at the zoo, and then he'd try to draw the animals when he got home. The very beginning of his later career as an illustrator. He tried his hand at realistic drawings, but said he was just never good at them. It was never a strong suit. He said, I was always drawing with pencils, pens, crayons, or anything. And nearly always it was animals, goofy-looking ones. My mother overindulged me and seemed to be saying, everything you do is great. Just go ahead and do it. Well, I think that's a great maternal policy. Good job, Mom. Building little Teddy's confidence up, nurturing that young mind. New York Times later, as long as there's effort. You don't want to just have a kid that just puts one fucking scratch across paper and herald it as the greatest thing ever. The New York Times later quoted Ted as saying, I used to hang around there a lot, the zoo. They'd let me in the cage with small lions and small tigers, and I got chewed up every once in a while. What a cool experience as a little kid. By middle school, Ted was a self-admitted rabble-rouser and smartass. Said he made himself the enemy of a neighbor named Horace Clark, who lived at 36 Fairfield Street, when he tried to hang a string telephone line between his window and that of his best friend Bill King, which was Clark's next-door neighbor. During Halloween of 1912, Ted and his friend Charles Napier decided to play pranks on their neighbors, and Ted went to Horace Clark's home to rattle a spool against his window, while Charles Napier took it a bit further and took a piss on Clark's front porch. They loved to fuck with poor Chuck. Napier escaped, but Ted was caught, and he later recalled, I'm afraid my father never believed me, when for many years after I protested my innocence. Horace nabbed and blamed me for the nuisance that CN had committed at least half an hour before. He then dragged me to my house, rang the doorbell, and told my father what I had not done to his porch, using, of course, the dignified sentence, Theodore wetted my stoop. 1914, Ted's grandfather sold his business again, selling it to the Springfield Breweries Company once more, same company he'd sold it to back in 1898. There would be no buying it back this time. This sale marked his official retirement. Ted's father, T.R. Geisel, kept working there, was promoted to manager of the family brewery. He earned $100 a week, about $3,200 with current inflation. Ted's young world was changing a lot around this time. During World War I, a lot of American communities began to express a fair amount of anti-German sentiment, including in Springfield. Ted's classmates would start to call him the German brewer's kid. The Geisel family tried to ignore it, but they would also leave town a fair amount to get away from it all during World War I. Ted was aware that his family was well off, but at the same time, he said he was also aware that his family's German heritage meant they would never truly attain the social status of the long-established families like the Wessons. Still, Springfield Breweries is doing well, moving over 500,000 barrels of beer across New England each year. However, brewers get nervous about the growing temperance movement. Right? There was concern that the government would prohibit the sale of alcohol altogether, which of course they would. Even the Geisel's neighbors were lobbying for a liquor ban, which had to have, caused a little bit of tension. Imagine working in a brewery and having next-door neighbors who are vocal about wanting to make all alcohol illegal for everyone. Hey, Pete, you do anything fun this weekend? Yeah, me and my family will probably be spending most of the weekend down at the brewery, protesting. It'll be a beautiful day when they shut down that den of sin and debauchery once and for all. What about you? I'll also be down at the brewery. I'll be managing it, managing the brewery that my dad built up from nothing. In order to affirm his family's American loyalties, 14-year-old Ted became one of the top sellers of war bonds in Springfield. And then later, in front of an audience of thousands, he was the last of 10 Boy Scouts who were to receive a personal award for their efforts from former President Theodore Roosevelt. However, Roosevelt was only given 9 medals. He was misinformed. And when he got to poor little Ted, he said in front of the entire audience, "What's this little boy doing here?" And then Ted was whisked off the stage, and the crowd of thousands had a good laugh, and he felt humiliated by the misunderstanding. He was so scarred by that experience that he dreaded public appearances for the rest of his life. Poor little guy. Who is this imposter? This stolen valor imposter acting like they've sold a bunch of war bonds? Get this phony out of my sight! No, please, I beg from my knees. I am who I say I am, you see. I did not con, I did sell bonds. Oh, please respond. Of the spectacle I am not fond. Ted started high school in the fall of 1917. According to author Brian J. Jones, for Ted, however, school was something to be endured, not mastered, though he later boasted of maintaining a B average, quote, without working. Ted struggled with basic math so much so that he refused to balance a checkbook later in life. Numbers just not his friend. He enjoyed foreign languages, but he hated Latin, hated it so much he frequently skipped class. Ted would later say, in high school, you had to go out for some kind of activity. I looked at these bruisers who were playing football, and I decided to do something with a pencil. It worked, and I enjoyed it. I like that. He was okay not doing what some back then, I'm sure, expected all the boys to do just because they were boys, which, never makes any sense. Just because football is good for some doesn't mean it's good for all. Doesn't mean it was good for Ted. High school is so strange that way, right? You get pushed into all these experiences that do not suit you. And I mean, I get it. You got to try some stuff, but so many kids being pressured into doing things they have no talent for or interest in because, other kids enjoy those things or just because those things have been done. Ted became known in high school amongst his peers for one-liners, which were called grinds back then. Ted often joked about Latin class, saying things like, "It'll be just our luck to be in Latin class when they turn back the clocks." He also wrote and drew for the Springfield Recorder. He attributed some of his cartoons to the pen name of Pete the Pessimist. His earliest known cartoon was a joke about a classmate named Francis Blinn, written FWA, who took 6 years to graduate. The cartoon shows a balding elderly man with a cane and a diploma under his arm. Poor Francis! Kid probably had a legit learning disability. Little Teddy just piling on. This early cartoon, done at Francis's fucking expense, was a simple line drawing of his profile. Ted was imitating the style of comics and newspapers at the time. Surprisingly, Ted only took one art class in high school, did not complete it, but the only class he'd ever taken in his life for art. He later recalled, "At one point during the class, I turned the painting I was working on upside down. I didn't know exactly what I was doing, but actually I was checking the balance. If something is wrong with the composition upside down, then something's wrong with it the other way. And the teacher said, 'Theodore, real artists don't turn their paintings upside down.' I somehow felt I wouldn't learn much from that teacher, so I left the course." Good for him at an early age to be able to recognize that, yeah, some teachers are actually not good at what they're teaching. Ted's father felt that his son needed more physical activity, so he made him enroll in dance classes, which Ted hated, quit as soon as he could. Next, his dad enrolled him in fencing classes at the Turnverein, that social club / gym in town, for Germans primarily. Ted called these classes hour-long agonies because they didn't just involve fencing. He was forced to do calisthenics, rope climbing, required to wear a pink jersey. Apparently, he just hated the whole thing. He attended 17 classes before his dad finally allowed him to quit after a lot of complaining. But then how embarrassing is this for a teen boy? Ted's instructor informed TR that his son had no pectoral muscles. Like none. So he recommended he buy Ted a canoe so he could row to develop some sort of upper body strength. "Mr. Geisel, I have terrible news. Your son doesn't have a chest. He literally has no pecs, just ribs. Just weak, little baby-boned ribs. that I could easily cave in and or shatter with one punch. If anyone, ever tries to hurt your son, they will be successful. Ted received an 18-foot canoe for his 15th birthday. He would push it out into the water, but he would he would refuse to row it, I guess, ever. I mean, he couldn't. How is he supposed to row with no chest? It's amazing he could hold a pencil, push it around a piece of paper to draw, and write with no chest. 1919 marked a shift in the Geisel family. That was a year where Ted finally received pectoral implants, and now he could knock out 1,000 push-ups in one go. No, Ted's grandfather passed away. December 5th of that year, he was 79 years old, had been suffering from a prolonged illness. Also on October 28th, 1919, Congress passed the Volstead Act, which defined intoxicating liquors that would be prohibited by federal law. One of the fucking dumbest laws. We've had so many dumb laws, still have so many dumb laws. This is one of the dumbest ones ever passed. Now Ted's dad about to lose his job. T.R. Geisel had tried to come up with solutions to keep the brewery open, even changed the recipe of his company's beer to reduce the alcohol content, but it would not be enough. Prohibition went into effect January 17th, 1920. T.R. had been promoted to president of Springfield Breweries that same week. Talk about poor timing. And then the business quickly shut down just days later. While his dad was out trying to figure out how he was going to make more money, Ted was focused on typical teenage issues like dating at this time. Brian J. Jones writes, while he would go for cheap laughs about women in his college humor magazine and would later be criticized for the absence of female protagonists in his work, Ted quietly idealized women and craved their attention and acceptance. Ted considered himself an awkward wallflower during high school, but he was determined to have a girlfriend, so he got involved in the social committee and prom committee. His first kiss was with a girl named Libby Ellsborg. And Ted would later say, I don't know why I kissed Libby, and neither did she. His first real crush was a girl named Thelma Lester. Thelma Lester, that's a kind of funny sounding combo there. He said of her, I loved her right down to the bottom of my boots. During high school, Ted was also involved in the debate club, served as secretary of the student senate, and he performed in the productions of The Mikado and Twelfth Night. During his final semester of high school, Ted wrote a 2-act minstrel show where he performed in blackface. I know. But before you climb to the top of the nearest mountain and shout, fuck Dr. Seuss and his racist asshole, and burn all of his books. He did do that in 1922, over a century ago, back when a lot of people truly did not seem to understand how racist that was, and back when some people who did do that were not actually racist, as crazy as that might sound. To show how normalized blackface was culturally back then, child star Shirley Temple, biggest child star of all time, arguably, wore blackface in the 1935 film The Littlest Rebel. No one batted an eye. Actor Fred Astaire, big dancer, wore blackface on film in 1936 Swing Time and again in 1948's Easter Parade. No one seemed to care. Cancel culture never came for him. No protests. Bing Crosby did it in 6 different movies. The last being 1944's Here Come the Waves. Not saying this was right, but, it was just the culture's reaction to it was not like it would be now. Also, Bing Crosby fought like hell for Louis Armstrong to receive equal billing in the 1936 film Pennies from Heaven. He insisted Armstrong be given a prominent role and featured on the film's poster, even in the face of heavy resistance from the producers. And that was a significant achievement. It marked the very first time a black performer in America had ever received such recognition in a major motion picture. And it would not have happened had Bing not stuck his neck out. So hard for me to write Bing off as being a, aggressive racist deserving of being canceled, when he also fought harder than anyone else who had clout in his era, apparently, in 1936 or previously, because he appeared in blackface. Am I saying it was a good call in all those instances and that no one should have had the right to complain about it then or now? No, not saying that. Also going to be limited in my ability to understand how upsetting it is, because I'm a white dude. But I'm saying that doing it in 1922 does not necessarily mean that the person doing it was a dirty racist bastard. I do always try and avoid presentism, which is the tendency to interpret past events in terms of modern values and concepts, because it is illogical and often unfair. Sorry for the detour, but it's rightfully a sensitive subject in a culture with a history of a lot of racism, and I think it deserves to be handled delicately. Dicks, dicks, dicks. Hateful folks who act like pricks. Oh, how they poison the well when they go low. Shame, shame, shame. Why must some schmucks behave in ways so lame? Someone who did something cringy last week we should blame, but perhaps others who did it long ago were not playing the same type of game. Ted's principal in high school, William C. Hill, described him as a young man of upright character and good ability. For senior superlatives, Ted's classmates voted him class artist and class wit. His senior quote was, "Next comedy appeared with great applause." Clearly, early on, he wanted to do something with a comedic element to it. It was important to Ted's parents that he attend college, but he wasn't sure where he wanted to go. Many students at his school were influenced by their English teacher, Edwin A. Smith, just 23 years old at the time. His students called him Red, apparently, because that was the color of the tip of his penis. Ted said about Red, rather than being just an English teacher, Smith was one of the gang, a real stimulating guy who was probably responsible for me starting to write. Red encouraged Ted to read the works of Hilaire Belloc, a French poet who wrote books for children with violent themes, such as The Bad Child's Book of Beasts in 1896 and 1907's Cautionary Tales for Children. Ted found himself enjoying the rhymes in these books. Rhymes such as, "The microbe is so very small, you cannot make him out at all. But many sanguine people hope to see him through a microscope." Because his idol, Red Smith, graduated from Dartmouth, Ted decided that's where he wanted to go to school. Oh, and Red Smith had red hair. His nickname had nothing to do with the tip of his penis. Guessing you knew that was bullshit immediately, but when I didn't correct it immediately, I do hope some of you were like, "Wait, what? Why was that guy showing kids his dick around school?" Seuss entered Dartmouth College in the fall of 1928. He would major in English. Ted wrote about his time at Dartmouth, and what he wrote was published in the beginnings of Dr. Seuss, an informal reminiscence, a book that came out in 2004 to commemorate the 100th anniversary of his birth. And he wrote that at Dartmouth, "I began to get it through my skull that words and pictures were yin and yang. I began thinking that words and pictures married might possibly produce a progeny more interesting than either parent. It took me almost a quarter of a century to find the proper way to get my words and pictures married. At Dartmouth, I couldn't even get them engaged." He also wrote about one of his mentors at college. "Well, my big inspiration there at Dartmouth was Ben Pressey, W. Benfield Pressey of the Department of English. He was important to me in college as Smith was in high school. He seemed to like the stuff I wrote. He was very informal and had little seminars at his house, plus a very beautiful wife who served as cocoa. In between sips of cocoa, we students read our trash aloud. He's the only person I took any creative writing courses from ever, anywhere, and he was kind and encouraging." Ted would eventually become editor-in-chief of the school's humor magazine, Jack-O-Lantern. Geisel called his work for Jack-O-Lantern an extension of my activities in high school, and a lot less dangerous than doing somersaults off the ski jump. At Jack-O-Lantern, the writers did not sign their literary content, so it's not possible to compile a full list of Ted's writings at Dartmouth. He wouldn't remember all of them either. In addition to Jack-O-Lantern, Ted did occasional work for the Dartmouth, America's oldest newspaper. First issue published in August 27, 1799, and in that first issue, their motto, my God, was published, "Here range the world, explore the dense and rare, and view all nature in your elbow chair." A lot of rhyming today. April 11th, 1925, the last semester of Ted's senior year, he organized a party for Jack-O-Lantern staff to celebrate the magazine's success, but then got caught drinking during Prohibition. And the brewery manager's son and brewery founder's grandson got in quite a bit of trouble. Ted wrote, "The night before Easter of my senior year, there were 10 of us gathered in my room at the Randall Club. We had a pint of gin for 10 people, so that proves nobody was really drinking." That is so fucking true. This was not a rager. This was a couple kids sipping on some gin, quite possibly sipping on some gin and juice, just like Snoop D-O-double-G. I mean, it was during the Prohibition era that drink became a popular drink. Back to Ted. But Pa Randall, who hated merriment, called Chief Rude, the chief of police, and he himself in person raided us. We all had to go before the dean, Craven Laycock. Oh my God, this guy's name was Craven Laycock. Dean Laycock. And we were all put on probation for defying the laws of prohibition, and especially on Easter evening. Ted was fired from his position as editor-in-chief, but he wanted to at least keep writing for Jack-O-Lantern. He would keep writing cartoons and jokes anonymously for Jack-O-Lantern, even though he was forbidden from doing so. He also kept illustrating for them, but he had to come up with a pseudonym for that because you were supposed to sign your artwork. He initially signed some of the illustrations with the pen names of L. Burbank, Thos Mott Osborne, and D.G. Rossetti. I'm sure those were a bunch of inside jokes. Also signed 2 cartoons with the pen names of Seuss and T. Seuss, the first versions of what would later become his very famous pen name. Ted wrote, To what extent this corny subterfuge fooled the dean, I never found out. But that's how Seuss first came to be used as my signature. The doctor was added later on. The doctor would apparently be a reference to his uncompleted doctorate degree. And I'll explain how that when that shows up later. Ted graduated with his Bachelor's of Arts in English from Dartmouth in 1925. Following graduation, Ted planned on winning the Campbell Fellowship in English Literature and then going to Oxford. He wanted to be a professor at this point in his life, professor of literature. He wrote about this to his father, and Ted Geisel misread the letter, thought his son already had won this fellowship, and he told their neighbor, Maurice Sherman, who was the editor of the Springfield Union, and then the editor published the headline, Geisel wins fellowship to go to Oxford. Everybody was so proud. But then Ted lost the fellowship. What an embarrassing experience. And then his dad, quote, had to dig up the money to send me to Oxford anyway to save face. It's a pretty funny way to end up at Oxford. At Oxford, Ted met a new mentor named A.J. Carlyle. He wrote, my tutor was A.J. Carlyle, the nephew of the great, frightening Thomas Carlyle. I was surprised to see him alive. He was surprised to see me in any form. Thomas Carlyle, by the way, literary giant of the Victorian era. A famous, widely revered Scottish intellectual who wrote a number of historical and philosophical works and more. A guy who helped establish the National Portrait Gallery in both London and Edinburgh. A guy who founded the London Library, and on and on. He died in 1881 at the age of 85. And Ted wrote of his nephew, he was the oldest man I've ever seen riding a bicycle. I was the only man he'd ever seen who never, ever should have come to Oxford. This brilliant scholar had taken firsts in every school in Oxford, excepting medicine, without studying. Every year up to his 80s, he went up for a different first, just for the hell of it. Patiently, he had me write essays and listen to me read them, in the usual manner of the Oxford tutorial system, but he realized I was getting stultified in English schools. I was bogged down with old High German and Gothic and stuff of that sort, in which I have no interest whatsoever. And I don't think anybody really should. Well, he was a great historian, and he quickly discovered that I didn't know any history. Somehow or other, I got through high school and Dartmouth without taking one history course. He very correctly told me I was ignorant, and he was the man who suggested that I do what I finally did. Just travel around Europe with a bundle of high school history books and visit the places I was reading about, go to the museums and look at pictures and read as I went. That's what I finally did. Man, how fucking cool. Ted got a chance to do that. I'm jealous. Ted added another anecdote about the professor who drove him out of Oxford by lecturing on the punctuational differences in Shakespearean text. Jesus Christ. After the professor spent an hour and a half discussing the punctuation in the first 2 pages of King Lear, Ted got up and started packing his shit. He was done. He also wrote about his Oxford notebook, which in his word, demonstrates that I wasn't very interested in the subtle niceties and complexities of English literature. As you go through the notebook, there's a growing incidence of flying cows and strange beasts. And finally, at the last page of the notebook, there are no notes on English literature at all. There's just strange beasts. Yeah, doodling way more fun than learning about Shakespearean punctuation differences. The most important person Ted met at Oxford was undoubtedly his future wife, Helen Marion Palmer. Helen was born September 16th, 1898 in New York City, grew up in Orange, New Jersey. Helen graduated from Wellesley College in Massachusetts, then came to Oxford in the fall of 1924 to become a teacher. She would graduate with a Master's of Arts in 1926. She would go on to write several children's books like her husband and could have written so many more if she hadn't been so busy helping his career. Ted later wrote, she was a gal who was sitting next to me when I was doing this notebook. And she was the one who said, you're not very interested in the lectures. She picked me up by looking over and saying, I think that's a very good flying cow. It was she who finally convinced me that flying cows were a better future than tracing long and short E through Anglo-Saxon. She was the one who convinced me that I wasn't for pedagogy at all. On the other hand, she did complete the English schools that year, took her degree in English Lit. This enabled her to get a job teaching English in the States, and that enabled us to get married. And that's awesome. And pedagogy, by the way, it's come up several times. I can never fucking remember that word. It's the method and practice of teaching. I can never remember what that word means or even how to say it. I have to look it up every time it comes up. You know how many times I've worked that word into a conversation? 0. By 1927, Ted had dropped out of Oxford. He just wasn't cut out for the rigorous study of subject he didn't give a shit about. And now he spent a year traveling in Europe, something he was able to do because his parents were, despite his dad losing the brewery job, because of Prohibition, they're fucking loaded. Man, he and recent Suck subject, Mr. Rogers. So fortunate to have family financial support most of the world can only dream of. And they both appreciate it. And their names rhyme. So that's a fun coincidence. Fred and Ted, Ted and Fred, both born a step ahead. Fred and Ted, Ted and Fred, they use their heads to stay ahead. Their families gave them wings to spread, but it was they who chose to flap them, Fred and Ted, Ted and Fred. During his travels, Ted attended a lecture by French professor Émile Leguy, translator and scholar of English literature. Ted spoke to him at the end of the lecture, and the professor convinced him to come to the Sorbonne, a famous public research university in Paris. Ted claimed he registered at the Sorbonne and went to the professor's house to find out what he wanted him to do. He said, I have a most interesting assignment, which should only take you... It's a fucking insane sentence. He said, I have a most interesting assignment, which should only take you about 2 years to complete. That's all. He said that nobody had ever discovered anything that Jonathan Swift wrote from the age of 16 and a half to 17. He said I should devote 2 years to finding out whether he had written anything. If he had, I could analyze what he wrote as my Doctor of Philosophy thesis. Unfortunately, if he didn't write anything, I wouldn't get my doctorate. I remember leaving his charming home and walking straight to the American Express Company and booking myself a passage on a boat to Corsica. There I proceeded to paint donkeys for a month. Then I proceeded with Carlyle's idea and began living all around the continent, reading history books, going to museums, and drawing pictures. I remember a long period in which I drew nothing but gargoyles. They were easier than Mona Lisas. While floating around Europe trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life, I decided at one point that I would be the great American novelist. So I sat down and wrote the great American novel. Turned out to be not so great. So I boiled it down in the great American short story. Wasn't very great in that form either. The adventure had to end at some point. His family was not willing to fund a life-endless adventure, so Ted returned to the U.S. now, moved back in with his parents, and while living with his parents, he submitted cartoons to national magazines to make some money. The Saturday Evening Post eventually accepted one of his submissions. Huge win for the young, hopeful illustrator, and they published it in their July 16th, 1927 issue. Ted, now 23 years old, signed his cartoon Seuss. He later explained why he decided to bring back the use of his college pen name, writing, the main reason that I picked Seuss professionally is that I still thought I was one day going to write the great American novel. I was saving my real name for that, and it looks like I still am. However, there was no real point to the anonymity because the Post published the byline beside the drawing drawn by Theodore Seuss Geisel. He was paid $25 for that cartoon and still had $1,000 saved up from his time at the Jack-o'-lantern back at Dartmouth. Seuss told his parents he was moving out now. He headed to New York City, moved in with his Dartmouth friend John C. Rose in a one-bedroom studio in Greenwich Village, located above a nightclub called the Pirate's Den. Man, I bet that nightclub was fucking awesome. In this moment, I want to travel back in time and be a young dude living above the Pirate's Den in Greenwich Village. Ted wrote about his time in this bachelor pad. The last thing we used to do at night was to stand on chairs and, with canes we'd bought for that purpose, play polo with the rats. Oh my God. And try to drive them out so they wouldn't nibble us while we slept. God, what a place. Yeah, I still want to go there. Somehow the rat talk actually makes it sound wilder and more appealing. Ted continued, and I wasn't selling any wares. I tried to do sophisticated things for Vanity Fair. I tried unsophisticated things for the Daily Mirror. I wasn't getting anywhere at all until John suddenly said one day, there's a guy called Beef Vernon of my class at Dartmouth who has just landed a job as a salesman to sell advertising for Judge. And Judge was a weekly satirical magazine, which was published from 1881 all the way to 1947. Ted's friend continued with, his job won't last long because nobody buys any advertising in Judge. But maybe before Beef gets fired, we can con him into introducing you to Norman Anthony, the editor. Oh, fucking Beef. You can't count on a dude named Beef to keep regular employment at any place for very long. Only thing you can count on with Beef is Beef consistently fucking up opportunities. Beef, he kept it brief. Brief employment, brief was Beef. But he bounced back quick was Beef, quick with jobs, and quick with grief. Ted reached out to Beef, and Beef, to his credit, hooked Ted up. Beef might not have, been steady and reliable in some ways, but he was a good dude, goddammit. Ted was offered a job as a staff writer / artist for the humor magazine for $75 a week, and that was enough money for Ted to make him feel like he could finally marry Helen, who was back in the U.S. teaching now. Helen will be the one to persuade Ted to give up his idea of being a professor and to focus on being a full-time cartoonist. Very cool. Supportive people, so important to artistic creation. Behind so many artists you know and love are people who, if they had not sacrificed and supported those artists in pivotal moments of their careers, you would never experience their art. I feel so lucky to have had such a good supportive partner in Lindsay. Helen later said, per the New York Times, Ted's notebooks were always filled with these fabulous animals. So I set to work diverting him. Here was a man who could draw such pictures. He should be earning a living doing that. Helen would later become her husband's business manager and editor. Ted and Helen will get married in Westfield, New Jersey, November 29th, 1927. And the week after the wedding, Ted's salary is reduced from $75 a week to $50. Bad timing. Because of a lack of profit, things started to get weird at Judge magazine. Ted wrote that he was once paid with 100 cartons of shaving cream and 13 nail clippers. Some story behind that. Because Ted's family was no longer financially supporting baby boy and they weren't making a lot of money, the newlyweds moved into an apartment across from a livery stable in Hell's Kitchen, or livery. I always want to say livery stable, Hell's Kitchen, where, quote, horses frequently died in the stable and they dragged them out and leave them in the street, where they'd be picked up by sanitation 2 or 3 days later. The fuck? So weird to think of a horse stable in Manhattan. But actually, they're still there. Most of the city's roughly 200 carriage horses that pull people around Central Park and whatnot live in stalls in Clinton Park stables in Hell's Kitchen today. And the NYPD has about 100 horses kept in stables, mostly in Hell's Kitchen. Anyway, Hell's Kitchen was a shithole back then. And Ted said he carried a cane to fend off muggers. He and Helen worked hard to get out of the area, eventually moved to 79th Street and West End Avenue. That corner there. Ted continued writing for Judge, and about half of his work would include drawings. In his Dartmouth memoir, he would write, I started to do a feature called Boys and Beasties. It was a mock zoological thing, and I put the doctor on Seuss to make myself sound more professional. And that is how Dr. Seuss came to be. From a forgotten feature called Boys and Beasties, published in a forgotten magazine called Judge. The more you know. Works by Dr. Seuss soon began to appear outside of Judge in other magazines like Liberty College Humor and Life. Ted even got a project with Vanity Fair, but that one didn't end up working out. Ted's next job was working for Standard Oil's advertising department. He would work for Standard Oil for over a decade, and his ads for the insecticide Flit, manufactured by Standard Oil, became nationally famous. I highly recommend Googling Dr. Seuss Flit advertisements. Very cool to see the exact kind of illustration style he would use for his later children's books being used to market an insecticide. His advertising campaign continued for 17 years and made Quick, Henry the Flit a very popular catchphrase in the U.S. And that all started in the spring of 1928. In Ted's own words about the time, I've been working for Judge almost 4 months when I drew this accidental cartoon which changed my whole life. It was an insecticide gag. It was a picture of a knight who had gone to bed. He had stacked his armor beside the bed. There was this covered canopy over the bed, and a tremendous dragon was sort of nuzzling him. He looked up and said, darn it all, another dragon. And just after I'd sprayed the whole castle with what, I wondered. There were 2 well-known insecticides. One was Flit and one was Flytox. So I tossed a coin. It came up heads for Flit. So the caption read, another dragon. And just after I'd sprayed the whole castle with Flit. Here's where luck came in. Very few people ever bought Judge. It was continually in bankruptcy, and everybody else was bankrupt too. But one day, and this is still Ted saying this, but one day, the wife of Lincoln L. Cleaves, who was the account executive on Flit at the McCann Erickson Advertising Agency, failed to get an appointment at her favorite hairdresser and went to a second-rate hairdresser where they had second-rate magazines around. She opened Judge while waiting to get her hair dressed, and she found this picture. She ripped it out of the magazine, put it in her reticule, which is a fancy word for purse, took it home, bearded her husband with it, and said, Lincoln, you've got to hire this young man. It's the best Flit ad I've ever seen. He said, go. He said, go away. He said, you're my wife, and you have nothing to do with my business. Oh, and excuse me, and you're to have nothing to do with my business. Jesus. Then Ted kept saying, so she pestered him for about 2 weeks, and finally he said, all right, I'll have him in. I'll buy one picture. He had me in. I drew one picture, which I captioned, Quick, Henry the Flit, and it was published. Then they hired me to do 2 more, and 17 years later, I was still doing them. The only good thing Adolf Hitler did in starting World War II was that he enabled me to join the army and finally stop drawing Quick Henry the Flit. I'd drawn them by the millions, newspaper ads, magazine ads, booklets, window displays, 24 sheet posters, even Quick Henry the Flit animated cartoons. Flit was pouring out of my ears and beginning to itch me. Ted wrote about the Standard Oil Company of New Jersey, the makers of Flit. They had a product called SO Marine, a lubricating oil for boats, and they didn't have a lot of money to spend on advertising. They decided to see what we could do with public relations. So Harry Bruno, a great PR man, Ted Cook, and Vern Carrier of SO and I cooked up the Seuss Navy. Starting small at one of the New York motorboat shows, we printed up a few diplomas. We took about 15 prominent people into membership, Vincent Astor and sailors like that who had tremendous yachts, so we could photograph them at the boat show receiving their certificates. We waited to see what happened. Well, Astor and Guy Lombardo and a few other celebrities hung these things in their yachts. And very soon, everyone who had a putt-putt wanted to join the Seuss Navy. Next year, we started giving annual banquets at the Biltmore. It was cheaper to give a party for a few thousand people, furnishing all the booze, than it was to advertise in full-page ads. And it was so successful because we never mentioned our product at all. Reporters would cover the party, and they would write our commercials for us. So we would end up with a national coverage about the Seuss Navy met blank, and then they would have to explain it by talking about SO Marine. At the time war was declared in 1941, we had the biggest navy in the world. We commissioned the whole Standard Oil fleet. We also had, for example, the Queen Mary and most of the ships of the U.S. lines. Then an interesting thing happened. I left to join the Army, and somebody said, "Thank God Geisel's gone. He was wasting a great opportunity. He wasn't selling the product. We have Seuss Navy hats, and we have Seuss Navy glasses and Seuss Navy flags." He said, "These things should carry advertising on them." They put advertising on them, and the Navy promptly died. The fun had gone out of it, and the Seuss Navy sank. God, he was such a smart dude. For all the years he worked on these Flit insecticide ads and the Seuss Navy and all that, Ted's work was seasonal, and he was able to finish it in about 3 months out of each year, which left him a lot of free time on his hands. Standard Oil allowed him to work for humor magazines in the off-season, but his contract was limited about what else he could do. And that is actually what led him into children's books. He later said, "I would like to say I went into children's book work because of my great understanding of children. I went in because it was not excluded by my Standard Oil contract." Isn't that funny how strange little circumstances like that can change somebody's life for the better in just incredibly powerful ways? Viking Press offered Ted a contract to illustrate a children's anthology. The book did not do well, not under its original title. But this would be his big break in children's literature, and this is so funny to me. Ted wrote the book was originally published in England, where it was called Schoolboy Howlers. Some smart person at Viking Press in New York, I think it was Marshall Best, bought out a reprint of the English edition under the title Boners. That's right, boners, like erections. But not because that's not what the word meant to people back then. The first Boners book was published in 1931, a good 3 decades before the word boner became common slang for an erection. And the first Boners book was published 3 years after the beginning of the Flit advertising campaign. At the time, boner was synonymous with blunder, and the book sold well. There were 7 released eventually. Dr. Seuss only wrote 4 of them. The publisher owned the rights to the title and the concept. A compilation of Ted's 4 books would sell very well during World War II, but it would not make Ted a bunch of money because he didn't own the rights. Ted wrote, whereupon hundreds of teachers in the USA began sending in boners from their examination papers, and the boner business boomed. That's a great sentence. And the boner business boomed. Ted was paid a flat fee for his writing, no royalties again. So despite the popularity of the series, 1.3 million copies of the compilation, The Pocket Book of Boners, would be in print by 1945. Again, Ted did not make a fortune off of that. His creativity and success with both the Boner series and his Flit marketing campaign did lead to opportunities to create ads for Ford Motor Company, NBC, oh my gosh, I hate this word. Narragansett. There we go. Narragansett Brewing Company. I always want to say Narragansett or something. Narragansett. I don't know. Actually, when I look at it, Narragansett. Yeah, it actually does look right. It just freaks me out when I first see it. Anyway, he created unique characters like the ones later featured in his books, such as the Motoraspis, the Carbonacus. Ted would say about his quirky characters, "If I start out with the concept of a 2-headed animal, I must put 2 hats on his head and 2 toothbrushes in the bathroom. It's logical insanity." Before he could ever have expected to become a big name in the children's book world, Ted was developing all the skills and success he would need to build that career, right? He's being paid to develop his distinct illustration style, working on all these advertising campaigns. He was learning how to sell a concept in as few catchy words as possible in the world of advertising, right? Catchy word economy. and a distinctive illustration style, that's what would make that combination, is what would make him a star in the world of children's books. And now let's learn about how Ted Geisel published his first Dr. Seuss children's book. Ted published his first book, of the Dr. Seuss line that we've come to know. And to think that I saw it on Mulberry Street in 1937 under his pen name of Dr. Seuss. He was 34 years old. It's a story that follows a boy named Marco who describes a parade of imaginary people in vehicles traveling along a road, Mulberry Street, in an elaborate fantasy he dreams up to tell his father at the end of his walk. However, when he arrives home, he decides instead to tell his dad what he actually saw, which was just a simple horse and a wagon. Here's a little taste. Now, what can I say when I get home today? All the long way to school and all the way back. I've looked and I've kept careful track. But all that I've noticed, except my own feet, was a horse and a wagon on Mulberry Street. There's nothing to tell of. That won't do, of course. Just a broken down wagon that's drawn by a horse. That can't be my story. That's only a start. I'll say that a zebra was pulling that cart. And that is a story that no one can beat when I say that I saw it on Mulberry Street. And now let's hear how Dr. Seuss ended up writing this first book. Pretty cool little story. Ted liked to take a vacation whenever he was really struggling for new ideas. And while on vacation, he would decompress, like a lot of people, by taking his belt and wrapping around the clothing rod inside of his closet. Then he would fasten that around his neck while he, would take off his pants and do what, Dick and Jane, all that stuff we talked about earlier. Seriously now, no. Autoerotic asphyxiation was not how he decompressed, as far as I know. He liked to take a vacation. He was stumped and burnt out. And he and Ellen would travel to Europe in the summer of 1936. They would spend several weeks in the Bavarian Alps. Sounds awesome. Their return trip home was spent stuck inside a big ship due to bad weather. Ted found himself fixated on the rhythm of the ship's engines until, quote, finally Helen suggested I think up nonsense rhymes to be said to the rhythm of the damned engines, just to get rid of it. Instead, Ted began writing down ideas for a narrative story. A stupid horse and wagon horse and chariot pulled by a flying cat pulling a Viking ship, sailing up a volcano blowing hearts, diamonds and clubs. Those are the first words he said I ever wrote in the field of writing for children. I put them down in the bar of the MS Kungsholm sometime during the summer of 1936. I wrote them for only one reason. I was trying to keep my mind off of the storm that was going on. Ted then wrote a rhyming couplet. I saw a giant 8 miles tall who took the cards 52 in all. He continued reciting words and phrases until the following lines hit him. And this is a story that no one can beat. I saw it all happen on Mulberry Street. This is the idea that stuck. Ted wrote, when I finally got off the ship, that refrain kept going through my head. I couldn't shake it. He didn't have a solid plan for his story, and at that point in his career, still not interested in writing solely for children, which was kind of like looked down upon in the literary world. He kept returning to his list of ideas from the ship and continued writing verses. He read them to Helen, asked for her opinion, because he valued her opinion above all others. Ted spent the winter of 1936 and early 1937 writing and drawing on this project. He said, 6 months later, I found I had a book on my hands. So what to do with it? Despite his success in advertising, despite the success of the Boners books, Ted had no literary agent, so he had to visit publishers himself to try and get a book deal. And he would be rejected 27 times in a row. That's fucking crazy. So many no's. How many people would have given up after one rejection? Would you have given up after one? Would you have given up after 5 or 10 or 20 or 25? He kept going. His book was originally titled A Story That No One Can Beat. Some editors pointed out that the book had no moral lesson, which annoyed Ted. He complained, what's wrong with kids having fun reading without being preached at? Other publishers disliked the rhyming verse in the story. Well, after his 27th straight rejection, Ted was finally fucking done. Ted, oh Ted, he'd lost his head. He'd been beat, defeat after defeat, shuffling down the street on the saddest of feet. Ted, oh Ted, he was done, he was through. 27 failures, not 2, and his book he withdrew. No one wanted Ted's silly, silly tale, so he walked home, lonely, chilly, and pale, with thoughts that screamed, fail, fail, fail. Walking along the streets of New York, Ted planned to burn his manuscript once he got home in his apartment building's incinerator. But then by chance, on Madison Avenue, he bumped into an old Dartmouth friend, not beef, unfortunately, Mike McClintock, who had just started working as an editor in Vanguard Press's children's division that very fucking morning. Ted later said, if I'd been going down the other side of Madison Avenue, I'd be in the dry cleaning business today. Ted met with Vanguard president James Henley soon after this chance run, and he claimed the meeting lasted just 20 minutes and ended with signing a contract. That might have been, one of his embellishments, but whatever, he got it. And to Think I Saw It on Melbury Street, it was published September of 1937 under the Dr. Seuss pseudonym. Vanguard gave the book a full-page ad in Publishers Weekly, and it worked. It did sell. Sales increased through word of mouth. Clifton Fadiman reviewed the book, this big critic at the time, in the New Yorker, and wrote, "They say it's for children, but better get a copy for yourself and marvel at the good Dr. Seuss's impossible pictures and the moral tale of a little boy who exaggerated not wisely but too well." Ted decided, if the great Kip Fadiman likes it, I'll have to do another. The New York Times called the book highly original and entertaining. The Atlantic wrote that the book was so completely spontaneous that the American child can take it to his heart on sight. Took a while, but it hit the modest 15,000 copies sold milestone that the publisher hoped for. And then it kept selling. Ted worried that the $1 price was too much, but by 1943, Mulberry Street had sold 31,600 copies, earning Ted $3,500 in royalties over those 7 years. Roughly $65,000 in today's money, just under $10,000 a year. Not nearly enough to live on. Not a smashing success, but a lot better than nothing. It was promising. It gave Ted the hope to continue. Later, Ted would be criticized for what has been viewed as a slight towards girls in this first book. And the story of the character Marco rejects including the detail of a reindeer pulling a sleigh in his imaginative story, saying that, quote, even Jane could come up with that idea. In 1977, Ted was asked about that line and told the Saturday Evening Post, "Suddenly, after all these years, I'm deluged with protests over that one line. They say that line will cause boys to grow up feeling superior to their sisters. They demanded I change the line." Ted insisted it was nothing personal, that Marco was expressing nothing more than normal sibling rivalry. It was not about Jane being a girl. It was about Jane being his sister, his sibling. He wrote, "The boy in my story did feel that way about his sister, and I wasn't about to change a rod." Ted also faced criticism for the way he illustrated Asian people in this book, which I will discuss before we are through today. Over the next decade, Ted would write 4 more books, publish hundreds of political cartoons, co-write an Academy Award-winning documentary, and more. Helen would write about her husband. About 2 weeks before the completion of every book, he seems to go into a tailspin. He decides that nothing in the book is any good, that he can't possibly finish it, and I have a great job to do in keeping everything from falling in the scrap basket. I'm at my wit's end, trying not to be rude. Man, I still get that. I have felt that way about every fucking stand-up album and special I've ever done. By the summer of 1938, Ted's second book was completed, and The 500 Hats of Bartholomew Cubbins was published that fall. It received good reviews, but sales, not so great. Many have overlooked Ted's dedication in this book to Chrysanthemum Pearl, age 89 months, going on 90. Chrysanthemum Pearl was Ted and Helen's imaginary daughter. When asked about having kids, Ted would famously say, "You have them. I'll entertain them." But according to biographer Brian J. Jones, Ted also said it was not that we didn't want to have children. That wasn't it. Around 1931, Helen had experienced severe abdominal pains. Doctors determined she needed removal of both ovaries. Her actual diagnosis is unclear, but doctors most likely concerned about severe ovarian cysts. Ted and Helen now knew they would never be able to have kids, at least not biologically. They were devastated, but wanted to keep that private, only telling immediate family. That was when they dreamed up their imaginary daughter of Chrysanthemum Pearl and made her birthday around the time of Helen's surgery. That is pretty fucking cute. Anytime a friend would then tell a story about their child in Ted's presence, he would make up a story of his own about his imaginary child, Chrysanthemum Pearl. On December 17th, 1938, Ted now meets Bennett Cerf, co-founder of Random House. Cerf told Geisel he liked what he had seen in his first 2 books and asked if he had any other projects in mind. And Ted apparently told him, quote, "Not especially. Maybe an adult book with naked ladies." And Cerf reportedly responded, "You come with me and I'll print anything you do." It's fucking awesome. Ted said about that meeting, "I felt Bennett Cerf was the kind of star I wanted my wagon hitched to. You could tell that Bennett was going somewhere." Well, Cerf was true to his word and did end up publishing Ted's Naked Lady book, a story titled The 7 Lady Godivas. Ted's first book for adults, one of his only. I think he did only 2. The 7 Lady Godivas were published on New Year's Eve, 1939. It was a reimagining of the historical figure, or possibly mythological figure, said to have once rode naked through the streets of Coventry in protest of taxes, and was only seen by a voyeuristic tailor named Peeping Tom. And that is the origin of that term for a voyeur. The more you know. Ted's tale featured the 7 Godiva sisters and their suitors, who were called the Peeping Brothers. In Geisel's telling, the nudity of the Godivas was incidental. The sisters were simply so smart that they had no time for frivol and froth, which included things like jewelry and clothing. Ted later said, I tried to draw the sexiest looking women I could, and they came out just ridiculous. I think their ankles came out wrong, and things like that. The book showed women's bare buttocks and exposed breasts, but no nipples. So fucking weird that has been the line for censors in this country for so long when it comes to, frontal nudity, upper body frontal nudity for women. Do the breasts have nipples? Filthy nipples? How dare those devil nozzles literally keep all human babies from dying until the recent invention of formula, but they're disgusting. Man, fuck the Puritans. Right? Those paranoid, superstitious, hateful dipshits. They poisoned the well of this country's formation. Still trying to clean out that bullshit today. Ted thought this book would be popular with adults writing at the time. I was groping for a way to get out of what I was doing. Unfortunately, didn't sell well. Ted said, it was my first adult humor book and my last. It was a complete failure. He blamed the $2 price in part for the book's failure and also thought the non-erotic drawings disappointed his adult readers because they just were not sexy. Parents were also pissed because the book was sold alongside his first 2 children's books in stores. Some libraries would actually discard the adult book or refuse to carry. How dare they show women's nudity? In total, Random House only sold 2,500 copies of Godiva's original printing, but Random House didn't drop him. Seuss's second book for Random House, 1939, was The King's Stilts, a fairy tale for children. Unfortunately, this book, also a huge failure, only sold 4,648 copies in the first year. Luckily, co-founder Bennett Cerf still believed in Ted and sent him on a book signing tour all the way to Cleveland. At this point, Ted was not sure there would ever be another Dr. Seuss book, especially because he was still making, pretty decent money with his Flit ad gig. He'd also been working on a side project he thought was going to change everything, an invention he called the infantograph. The infantograph's banner said, if you were to marry the person you are with, what would your children look like? Come in and have your infantograph taken. The premise was that a couple would sit side by side, and then a double-lens camera would blend their features together, creating an image of their future child. Ted hoped that the infantograph would be his big claim to fame. In his words, it was a wonderful idea, but all the babies tended to look like William Randolph Hearst. That's so fucking funny to me. Fun concept, but tech just not there yet to execute it. Good thing the infantograph was a failure, or you would never have the Grinch and Whoville and so much more. Ted had already started working on another children's book by the fall of 1939, a story about an elephant stuck in a tree. Ted would say that the inspiration for Horton Hatches the Egg was totally accidental. He said, I was just sitting doodling on some transparent paper. I had drawn a tree. I had drawn an elephant. When one paper lighted on top of the other, it looked as if the elephant were sitting in the tree. Ted went through several names before he settled on Horton, an elephant who volunteers to sit on an egg for a bird named Maisie. Ted decided Maisie would be a lazy bird abandoning her egg, and Horton would sit on the egg because he promised to take care of it. The book features a line, I meant what I said, and I said what I meant. An elephant's faithful 100%. Horton's considered the archetypal Seuss hero, according to the New York Times. Ted was very proud of this one. He wrote to someone at Random House, it is a beautiful thing, the funniest juvenile ever written. Being written. Never before have I stood before myself and pointed so proudly, saying, genius you are. Jesus. I feel certain it will sell well over 1 million. P.S. I like my new book. So he's obviously just joking around. Horton Hatches the Egg was completed in the spring of 1940. It didn't quite sell 1 million copies, at least not in Ted's lifetime. It's definitely sold more than 1 million now. It had sold 987,996 copies by 2001. But it only sold 5,800 copies in the first year, and then 1,645 the second. So the book did all right. Still not nearly well enough for Ted to make writing books his full-time gig. Between 1940 and 1942, Ted made more money doing cartoons for adults. He drew over 400 editorial cartoons for the New York City daily newspaper PM alone. PM was founded by writer and publisher Ralph Ingersoll and was in print between 1940 and 1948. Ted was very politically minded at this point in his life and wanted to express his opposition to American isolationism, including aviation hero Charles Lindbergh, who held that view. He said, I found that I could no longer keep my mind on drawing pictures of Horton the elephant. I found myself drawing pictures of Lindbergh, the ostrich. According to a History.com article about this part of Ted's career, although the cartoons sport his distinctive style and a fanciful menagerie of creatures, the subject matter is quite foreign, in more ways than one, to Dr. Seuss readers. One cartoon depicts a Lindbergh quarter with an ostrich sticking its head in the ground in place of an American eagle. Another showed Lindbergh patting the head of a swastika-covered sea serpent that sported Hitler's trademark mustache. So yeah, he was just, Dr. Seuss, not cool with Charles Lindbergh being like, nah, we don't need to worry about Hitler. Nah, that's Europe's problem. It'll be fine. They'll figure it out. His cartoons also encouraged the conservation of resources and the purchase of savings bonds and stamps to raise money for the American World War II effort. When Ted heard news of the bombing of Pearl Harbor, he put down what he was doing and drew a bird labeled isolationism, being blasted into the sky by an explosion with the caption, he never knew what hit him. In recent years, many have described the depictions of the Japanese in some of Ted's political cartoons as being racist. To again pull a quote from History.com about this, with the United States now at war with Japan, Geisel's cartoons increasingly trafficked in racial stereotypes. He portrayed Japanese leaders as narrow-eyed, buck-toothed caricatures. And again, I will address this before the episode is over. On February 13th, 1942, PM ran a Dr. Seuss cartoon captioned, Waiting for the Signal from Home. The cartoon depicted Japanese Americans along the Pacific coast lining up to get bricks of TNT. Biographer Brian J. Jones would call this one of the lowest moments in Dr. Seuss's career. Further, it's a shockingly tone-deaf message coming from Ted Geisel, who had experienced bigotry by association during World War I, when he was pelted with coal and mocked for no reason other than a shared heritage with the enemy. At the same time he's making these drawings, Ted was also speaking out against anti-Semitism and fascism. March 27th, 1942, the Saturday Evening Post published a piece by writer Milton S. Mayer called The Case Against the Jew. Mayer accused Jews of being the source of national and international issues. The very next day, PM editor Ralph Ingersoll published an editorial on the front page of PM that said, America is great because of the fact that not races or creeds, but the people themselves are what is important. Neither the colors they come in nor the creeds their fathers handed down to them shall be allowed to hinder nor to help them in their pursuit of happiness. Ted was inspired by PM's response, and it marked a turning point in his career. He drew cartoons disavowing anti-Semitism and racism of all forms. He still used his cartoons to speak out against Japan and the war atrocities the Japanese Empire was committing, and to be clear, they were especially ruthless, as we have gone over numerous times here before. But Ted never again advocated for the internment of Japanese Americans, like he had previously. In June of that year, civil rights leader A. Philip Randolph spoke in front of a crowd of 18,000, at Madison Square Garden, asking for an end to discrimination in the military, in labor unions, and in government contracting. And 2 weeks later, Ted produced a cartoon also advocating for the war industry to end discrimination. Back to 1942 now, Ted Geisel was too old for the draft, but he was recruited to use his creative skills for the benefit of the U.S. during the Second World War. He originally applied for a commission from Naval Intelligence, but it was a long approval process, and so in December of 1942, he accepted a commission from the Army. And Ted would say, they, the Army, didn't want me, but they had to have me. He reported for active duty at Fort MacArthur, California, in the San Pedro neighborhood of Los Angeles, January 7th, 1943. Ted joked that he joined the Army to save face. He said, I got a letter to the editor at PM saying, Dr. Seuss, who is so old he can't be drafted, got us into this war. I thought maybe I'd started the war, so I better join up. Ted had been actively recruited to join the Army by Lieutenant Colonel Frank Capra, the director in command of a unit from the within the Signal Corps, which creates and manages communications and information systems for the military. Capra was tasked with producing training films, informational brochures, and other educational materials for soldiers. And yes, this is that Frank Capra, the biggest director in Hollywood at the time, one of the biggest ever, guy who won the Academy Award for Best Director 3 separate times. In late 1942, Capra sent out writer Leonard Spiegelgas to New York to look for writers, artists, and filmmakers. Spiegelgas found Ted Geisel and reported, quote, he has a remarkably good brain and seems to me useful infinitely beyond a cartoonist. Ted was offered a temporary appointment with Capra's unit effective December 31st, 1942. Days later, Ted found out he had been accepted by Naval Intelligence, but now declined their offer. After arriving at Fort MacArthur, Ted was commissioned as a captain. Frank Capra's unit moved into the vacant Fox studio, the lot at 1421 Northwestern Avenue in Hollywood, California, showbiz, That location was called Fort Fox. Today, it's a strip mall. It's a Target, a Pizza Hut, and a couple other shops. Ted's duties at Fort Fox were similar to a regular day job, which allowed him to go home at the end of the day. He and Helen moved into a 3-bedroom home in Hollywood. When Ted arrived, Capra's unit was working on the first of a 7-film series titled Why We Fight. The first film, Prelude to War, examined how Japan conquered Manchuria and how Italy conquered Ethiopia. It would later win an Academy Award for Best Documentary. Capra told his team, "You are working for a common cause. Your personal egos and idiosyncrasies are unimportant. There will be no personal credit for your work, either on the screen or in the press. The only press notices we are anxious to read are those of American victories." Well, fucking hell, Nimrod. Capra was apparently a very cool dude, widely respected by all the men in his unit. Pulitzer Prize-winning historian Paul Hogan would later say, "The innate quality of Capra's leadership was so implicit that he never had to exert it. It came from the power of that man's character." Capra's unit would produce 17 orientation and propaganda films, some just 10 minutes long, some over an hour. They also produced regular 15-minute newsreels every 2 weeks and a weekly staff film report, which was a classified project. The briefing films included war footage that was viewed by the president and other federal officials. The unit had to sort through over 200,000 feet of raw footage and cut together reels with narration and occasional animation. One of Ted's first assignments was making art for a U.S. Medical Corps booklet, teaching soldiers to protect themselves from malaria. Captain Munro Leaf, a PR consultant and author of The Story of Ferdinand, a children's book, believed that soldiers would be more likely to read and understand a brochure if it was similar to children's literature. He offered to write the text and created a character called Anne, short for the Anopheles mosquito, which transmits malaria. And it was very easy for Seuss to draw a mosquito because of all the work he had done for Flit. Capra then approached Ted with a concept that would become the newsreel's most popular segment. A year earlier, he'd assigned a staff writer to develop a short comedic film titled Hey Soldier, where a private learns the rules of the Army the hard way. The film was never produced, but Capra noticed that the soldiers preferred animated segments. Capra proposed a series of animated shorts now about a bumbling soldier named Private Snafu. Snafu, by the way, is a military acronym. It stands for Situation Normal, All Fucked Up. It means that the situation is bad, but that's the normal state of affairs. I have used that word a ton of times over the course of my life, never knew it was an acronym until this week. Once again, the more you know. Well, Ted sent project bids to Disney and Warner Brothers about this. Disney wanted full ownership of the Private Snafu character, which sounds like Disney. Warner Brothers did not. Ted worked with writer and animator Charles M. Jones, who had been directing projects for Warner Brothers for 6 years. Ted wrote the scripts for the first installments of Private Snafu to set the tone and pace for other writers. That experience would help him learn how to create storyboards. Private Snafu first premiered in June of 1943. Massive hit amongst the soldiers. Britannica will describe Private Snafu as a bald, bumbling GI with the looks of Elmer Fudd and the voice of Bugs Bunny. In nearly 30 episodes, the misadventures of the inept soldier both entertained and educated servicemen by demonstrating the pitfalls of doing things exactly as they shouldn't be done, such as disobeying orders, evading censors, and leaking classified information. Ted's Private Snafu cartoons were much more risque than his normal works, but the acronym that inspired the name was changed to Situation Normal, All Fouled Up. Can't have fucked. It's gonna, just cause people to lose their minds. Snafu was not censored like other cartoons at the time, though, because it was solely for a military audience and did not have to uphold the motion picture production code. The cartoons could include mild profanity, off-color jokes, and double entendres. I had no idea these cartoons were made. Same animation styles, the old Looney Tunes cartoons. Here's an excerpt from Private Snafu's a Private Snafu cartoon called Spies.
Hello, Ma. I got a secret. I can only drop a tip. Don't breathe a word to no one, but I'm going on a trip.
He's being spied on.
Shh! Don't breathe a word to no one, but he's going on a trip. Hey, give me some magazines to read for when I'm on the ship.
Being spied on.
Don't breathe a word to no one, but he's going to go by ship.
So you get it, right? Private Snafu walks around town, leaking a minor detail here, a minor detail there, thinking nothing of it. Unbeknownst to him, Japanese, Italian, and German spies are following him everywhere he goes, and they're putting all the pieces together, and they figure out what his secret mission is. And then they blow him the fuck up when he's out at sea on that mission. He's got bombed. Now he's sinking down to the bottom of the ocean. Looney Tune style. Now he's fucking down there in hell. He went all through the ocean down into hell.
Now, who in hell do you suppose it was that let my secret out?
The devil appears.
What was that I heard you say, my little sauerkraut?
The devil looks like Hitler.
Wonders who in hell it was that let his secret out.
Oh, then he looks in the mirror and he sees a horse's ass. You did, you son of a bitch. You let your secret out. That's pretty cool, though. They put those together for the troops. Very cool, actually. In March of 1944, Ted was promoted to major, and now he began focusing on live-action documentaries. One of those was Your Job in Germany, which explained to soldiers what their mission would be after the Nazis surrendered. Your Job in Germany, directed by Frank Capra, was later remade into the Academy Award-winning 1945 short documentary film Hitler Lives. Ted would not be credited for that film. Your Job in Germany warned soldiers that Germans could not be trusted. A line from the film read, "The Nazi party may be gone, but Nazi thinking, Nazi training, and Nazi trickery remain. The German lust for conquest is not dead." Very interesting for Ted to work on that as a German American with German-born grandparents, and undoubtedly relatives still living in Germany. Ted traveled to Europe to show generals the top secret film, to show generals the top secret film, and he actually ended up being trapped for 3 days behind German lines during the Battle of the Bulge, last major German offensive on the Western Front, until he could be rescued. The only poor review of his documentary came from General George Patton, the infamous George Patton, who said a one-word profanity and then walked out of the screening. I gotta suck Patton one of these days. Dude was such a fucking character. Just a living legend, especially during World War II. Before moving on, let me share just a few excerpts of Patton's infamous speech to the Third Army, delivered in 1944 before the Allied invasion of France, when Patton was 58 years old. I'll bounce around between a few great quotes from this speech. "You are all not going to die. Only 2% of you right here today would be killed in a major battle. Every man is scared in his first action. If he says he's not, he's a goddamn liar. An army is a team. It lives, eats, sleeps, and fights as a team. This individual hero stuff is bullshit. The bilious bastards who write that stuff for the Saturday Evening Post don't know any more about real battle than they do about fucking. Each man must think not only of himself, but think of his buddy fighting alongside him. We don't want yellow cowards in the army. They should be killed off like flies. If not, they will go back home after the war, goddamn cowards, and breed more cowards. The brave men will breed more brave men. Kill off the goddamn cowards, and we'll have a nation of brave men." God, no one gave a fucking pep talk. Like old Blood and Guts. Back to Ted, he also wrote the script for the film Know Your Enemy, Japan, which was released the same day the atomic bomb was dropped on Nagasaki. Ted also worked on the 18-minute film Our Job in Japan, but General MacArthur prevented that film's release before it was finished. Following the war, Ted and Helen would use the unreleased Our Job in Japan short film as the basis for their screenplay for the 1947 documentary Design for Death, which would earn another Academy Award. Very cool that the two of them won an Academy Award together, or each won one while working together. During his service, Ted received a Legion of Merit Award for exceptionally meritorious service in planning and producing films, particularly those utilizing animated cartoons for training, informing, and enhancing the morale of the troops. Also in 1947, Ted and Helen moved to La Jolla, California, a sleepy and gorgeous seaside community just north of San Diego. Best weather in the whole damn country, in my opinion. Average daily temperature year-round, 70.5 degrees Fahrenheit, with a slight breeze coming off the ocean. Always sunny. The mean daily maximum temperature varies from 66 in January to 79 in August. The low, 47 to 66 degrees based on the month. Record low, just barely below freezing in January. 99 out of 100 days, for me at least. Doesn't get too cold at night. Doesn't get too hot during the day. Low humidity and ocean air. I'm just a huge fan of the San Diego area climate. The Geisels had visited La Jolla during their November 1928 one-year anniversary trip 2 decades earlier and knew they wanted to live there permanently. I'm telling you, it's got that weather and the views. They lived in an old observation tower, which they appropriately named the Tower. Just a badass piece of property. Here in La Jolla, Ted will mostly dedicate the remainder of his life to writing books, and he wrote many, if not most of them, in the Tower. He would publish again over 60 books. He won't be able to only write books for a while, though. Still not making enough money off of just books. but he'll write and illustrate for at least 8 hours a day and then garden in his spare time. He and Helen were also active in their community and served on several nonprofit boards. But Ted wasn't only writing children's books in the post-war years, 1951. Ted co-wrote the animated short Gerald McBoing Boing, which was actually another Academy Award winner. Who knew he fucking won all these Academy Awards? Here's a little sample.
They say it all started when Gerald was 2. That's the age kids start talking. At least most of them do.
I love that old music.
Well, when he started talking, you know what he said? He didn't talk words. He went... instead.
Uh-oh.
What's that? Cried his father, his face turning gray. That's a very odd thing for a young boy to say. And poor Gerald's father rushed to the phone and quick dialed the number of Dr. Malone. Come over fast, the poor father pled. Our boy can't speak words. He goes boing, boing instead.
You get the idea. Damn kid won't stop saying boing boing and other words like that. Just makes little sound effects with his mouth instead of words. It's actually a really sad cartoon. I'm surprised they allowed something, kind of like that dark to win. Gerald's dad will end up insisting that Dr. Malone operate on his boy to find the source of the noises, and Gerald will die on the operating table. And then his dad will mangle his corpse, digging through his guts with his hands to find the source of the strange sounds his son is making, but he can't. He ends up committed to an insane asylum for the rest of his life, constantly crying out, "The boing boing is in the blood! The boing boing is in the blood!" No, he grows up to become essentially a famous sound effects creator for Hollywood productions. It's a happy tale. Ted started working on one of his most beloved books, Horton Hears, in the fall of 1953. The manuscript was delivered to Random House in January of 1954 and released in August of that year. Horton Hears was inspired by Ted's visit to Japan in 1953. He was affected by the devastation of the atomic bombing and retracted some of his previous anti-Japanese views. That's awesome. The book features the famous line, "A person's a person, no matter how small," which was not a commentary on the size of Japanese people, I don't think. Horton Hears also marked the first time Geisel had deliberately written a book with an ethical point of view. His 1953 book, The Sneetches, also touches on racism in an age-appropriate way for children. The Sneetches are a group of yellow bird-like creatures, some of whom have a green star on their bellies. At the beginning of the story, Sneetches with stars discriminate against and shun those without stars. And then an entrepreneur/con artist, a fucking grifter, named Sylvester McMonkey McBean, calling himself the Fix-It-Up Chappie. He appears, offers the Sneetches without stars the chance to get them with his star-on machine for $3 each. The treatment is instantly popular, but this upsets the original star-bellied Sneetches as they are in danger of losing their special status. McBean then tells them about his star-off machine, costing $10. And the Sneetches who originally had stars happily pay the money to now have them removed in order to remain special. However, McBean does not share the prejudices of the Sneetches and allows the recently starred Sneetches through this machine as well. Ultimately, it escalates with the Sneetches running from one machine to the next until, quote, "Neither the plane nor the starbellies knew whether this one was that one or that one was this one, or which one was what one, or what one was who." The Sneetches eventually learn after growing broke and getting swindled by that son of a bitch, that no-good rat Fink McBean, that neither plain-bellied nor star-bellied Sneetches are superior, and they're able to get along and become friends. Team Meat Sack, Hail Nimrod. But still at this point, the money from books is not enough to live on, and Ted continued doing mostly ad work. As discussed in the intro, in 1954, Life published an article criticizing American children's reading levels. And now Random House asked Ted to write a children's primer using about 220 vocabulary words. Ted's resulting work, The Cat in the Hat, is published in March of 1957. It was 223 words. It is this iconic book that cemented Geisel's place in children's literature. "Oh dear," said the cat, "you did not like our game. Oh dear, what a shame, what a shame, what a shame." Then he shut up the things in the box with a hook, and the cat went away with a sad kind of look. "That is good," said the fish, "he has gone away." "Yes, but your mother will come. She will find this big mess, and this mess is so big and so deep and so tall, we cannot pick it up. There is no way at all." And then, who was back in the house? Why, the cat. "Have no fear of this mess," said the Cat in the Hat. "I always pick up all my playthings, and so I will show you another good trick that I know. Then we saw him pick up all the things that were down. He picked up the cake and the rake and the gown, and the milk and the strings and the books and the dish, and the fan and the cup and the ship and the fish. And he put them away. Then he said, "This is that." Then he was gone with a tip of his hat. That was his first true hit. Sold very well right out of the gate, 12,000 or more a month the first few months. Then it went up from there. Within 3 years, it sold nearly 1 million copies, also received critical acclaim. And now at the age of 53, Ted does not have to take work he doesn't want to do. Especially because that same year, Ted also published How the Grinch Stole Christmas, now a holiday classic that encourages young readers to perform good deeds. Sales for this book seem to have been similar for sales of Cat in the Hat. It's happening. It's finally happening. He is now a full-time professional author. But before exploring more of his literary success, let's back up the timeline a few years, and discuss one of the most significant developments in Dr. Seuss's personal life. In the early spring of 1954, Ted learned that Dartmouth wanted to bestow him with an honorary doctorate degree. Several weeks before heading to the commencement ceremony in May, Ted and Helen attended a dinner party together in La Jolla. And when they got up to leave, Helen, who was now 55 years old, she complained of pain in her feet and ankles, and a physician, who happened to be a guest at this party, asked to examine her. Helen refused to let him take a closer look because she was embarrassed. Ted then drove the couple home, even though Helen typically always drove because Ted was infamously a terrible driver, and he got Helen into bed. By the following morning, the pain had intensified, spread to her legs and lower back. That night, Helen was taken to a clinic. By this point, her arms, hands, and face were numb, and she couldn't swallow. Quickly, Helen had trouble standing, speaking, and focusing, which caused her to become panicked. Ted took her to see a doctor, and he diagnosed her with Guillain-Barré syndrome, a serious disorder where the immune system mistakenly attacks the nerves, and it can lead to paralysis. Helen was transferred to see a specialist at the San Diego County Hospital. By the time she arrived there, she was unable to breathe on her own, had to be taken to the ICU, placed in an iron lung, which was commonly used to treat people suffering from polio at that time. Interesting fact about polio, the polio vaccine actually discovered by a neighbor of the Geisels in La Jolla, Jonas Salk. Helen's health steadily deteriorated until she was fully paralyzed from the neck down. That's fucking terrifying. She was also disoriented, confused, became convinced that she was in prison because she and Ted had lost all their money, and her health continued to deteriorate further. She struggled to recognize her husband or her doctors, eventually lost the ability to speak at all. Ted was frantic and frightened, refused to leave the hospital to go home for a long time. He tried to work, but he couldn't focus. The Dartmouth commencement ceremony was out. Fortunately, Helen started to improve in late June. She regained the ability to swallow on her own, could make some sounds, but wasn't talking yet. Starting on July 4th, she was removed from the iron lung for brief periods of exercise. Helen was then moved to the Rehabilitation Center of Santa Monica for 4 months of physical therapy. Ted checked into the nearby Ocean Palms Hotel to work and visit his wife as often as he could. That was when he received his first copies of Horton Hears a Who for publication. Crazy what personal problems he was dealing with when he wrote that beloved book. Helen's paralysis proceeded further in July and August, and feeling returned to her neck, chest, arms, and legs. She still couldn't speak nor feed herself, though, would need extended physical therapy. When she then finally learned to speak again, strangely, one of her first words was rabbit. Ted recalled that Helen improved through sheer force of will, was eventually able to walk without crutches. She was finally able to return to La Jolla in September. She moved into a friend's guest house as the tower was built on a hill and had too many stairs. Helen, sadly, would be plagued by varying levels of nerve pain in her legs and feet for the rest of her life. She described it as a feeling that her shoes were always several sizes too small, which sounds fucking terrible. The summer following the beginning of Helen's health problems, in June of 1955, Dartmouth bestowed an honorary degree of humane letters to Geisel now, with the citation, "You single-handedly have stood as St. George between a generation of exhausted parents and the demon dragon of unexhausted children on a rainy day." Oh, man, that's so good. Jumping ahead 3 years in 1958, Ted and Helen, who other than foot and leg pain is back to where she was before her illness, they co-founded Beginner Books Incorporated, a division of Random House. Phyllis Cerf was the one who helped push them to do that. Phyllis was a former actress, newspaper writer, ad exec, the wife of Random House co-founder Bennett Cerf. Incredibly impressed by Cat in the Hat. After reading it, hearing about its sales, she went to her husband with an idea. She suggested that Random House set up an imprint dedicated solely to publishing books just like the Cat in the Hat. Dr. Seuss sales were booming at the time. Random House was the largest publisher of children's books in the U.S. It was a perfect combo. In late 1957, Phyllis invited Ted to lunch while he was visiting New York, and she proposed Beginner Books. which would use a list of approved vocabulary words and would serve the same purpose as the Cat in the Hat, getting young children interested in reading, and Ted was on board. He told the New York Times in 1962, "I'd say that the most useful of my books is The Cat in the Hat. That had a different purpose, to help reading, and it goes back to my old ambition to be an educator." There were some important stipulations on Ted's side. He had to be allowed to produce books independent of the venture, and Helen had to be brought in as a full partner, which is super cool. Phyllis Surf accepted his terms, and they launched Beginner Books in June of 1958. Ted was made president, Phyllis was made chief executive, and Helen was an equal but untitled partner. Phyllis later told Publishers Weekly, "We want to publish books that take up where textbooks leave off." Initially, educators and parents were skeptical that Beginner Books could continue producing engaging, easy-to-read books every single year. But no need to worry, Ted was on fire now that he didn't have to, be distracted by other work. Write. Ted could write with all his might. Late at night by candlelight. My, that Ted would write and write. Draw. The wonderful creatures Ted would draw. Creatures that would make you ooh and ah. Thing 1 and Thing 2, the Grinch and Cindy Lou Who. Oh, the wonderful new and strange things our dear Theodore now drew for you. Beginner Books would publish famous Dr. Seuss works such as Hop on Pop, One Fish, Two Fish, Red Fish, Blue Fish, Green Eggs and Ham, and Fox and Socks. Fox and Socks teaches tongue twisters such as socks on chicks and chicks on fox, fox on clocks on bricks and blocks, bricks and blocks on knocks on box. Ted and Helen also created the Dr. Seuss Foundation in 1958, and to date, that organization has gifted over $300 million to charitable causes. So hail Nimrod. December 18th, 1966, Dr. Seuss's book, The Grinch Who Stole Christmas, is adapted into a made-for-TV cartoon for CBS. The 26-minute special was budgeted at more than $300,000, approximately $3 million in present-day funds, which was a shocking amount for a 26-minute cartoon. In comparison, A Charlie Brown Christmas only cost $96,000, and that was $20,000 over its original budget. It was listed as a Cat in the Hat production. I bet many of you have seen it a shitload of times. They still air the hell out of this every holiday season, and I still love it.
Every Who down in Whoville liked Christmas a lot, but the Grinch, who lived just north of Whoville, did not.
Oh, Grinch.
The Grinch hated Christmas, the whole Christmas season. Now, please don't ask why. No one quite knows the reason. It could be perhaps that his shoes were too tight. It could be his head wasn't screwed on just right. But I think that the most likely reason of all may have been that his heart was 2 sizes too small.
Pretty funny that the Grinch might be grumpy because his shoes are too small, or I guess his socks are too tight, right? Considering what we know about Ted's wife Helen's feet pain. How her feet felt due to her Guillain-Barré syndrome, like her shoes were always several sizes too small. Was that a little inspiration there? Was she pretty grumpy? I bet she was. I would fucking be grumpy if my feet hurt all the time. In 2000, The Grinch Story was adapted into a full-length animated live-action feature starring Jim Carrey. It fucking crushed. Made almost $350 million at the box office against a budget of $123 million, and has made who knows how many more millions on DVD, syndication, and streaming rights sales. And then the story was remade into an animated film in 2018, starring Benedict Cumberbatch and Rashida Jones, crushed even harder, made $540 million at the box office versus a $75 million budget. Holy shit, that's a lot of profit. How many mansions in the Hollywood Hills were built with Grinch money? The Grinch, how many pennies did he make many forget to pinch? And that wasn't the only Dr. Seuss book to be adapted into a movie. In 2008, Horton Hears a Who, released as an animated film, starring Jim Carrey again, Steve Carell, Carol Burnett, $85 million budget, just under $300 million at the box office. Jim Carrey making so much Seuss coin. 2012, The Lorax was adapted into an animated movie starring Danny DeVito, Zac Efron, Taylor Swift, Betty White. Oh, Betty White, we love her. $70 million budget, $351 million at the box office. There was also 2003's Cat in the Hat film starring Mike Myers, Alec Baldwin, Kelly Preston, and Dakota Fanning. $109 million budget, $134 million at the box office. Not as good, but still profitable. And who knows, we know how it's done with, streaming rights, sales, syndication, all that. There's also, been there have been TV series, television specials, Broadway musical, etc. Dr. Seuss's IP has made other people hundreds of millions of dollars over the years. Pretty magical when you think about it. There are probably a dozen or more multimillionaires out in the world who owe most of their fortune to one guy's doodles and rhyming, stories. Dr. Seuss was a full-time, thriving, respected children's author by the 1960s, but his personal life would be troubled by a terrible tragedy. Ted and Helen, at this point in their lives, loved to host weekly sit-down dinners at their house with at least 30 guests. These big parties. Sounds awesome. Invitations to their home were, according to one source, some of the most coveted in the region. Around 1963, estimated based on a letter written by Geisel, they became close with another married couple, Gray and Audrey DeMond. Audrey was born on August 14th, 1921 in Chicago. She earned her Bachelor's of Science in Nursing from Indiana University in 1944. Later worked at the Cambridge City Hospital in Massachusetts. And Audrey married a doctor, a cardiologist to be exact, E. Gray Diamond, who went by Gray in 1945. Gray served in the U.S. Army Medical Corps, was the head of the Department of Medicine at the University of Kansas Medical Center. Audrey had dreamed of marrying a doctor, having 2 daughters, and she did. Her daughters are Lark Gray DeMond Cates and Leah Diamond, or Leah DeMond. And Audrey's life was going according to plan until she met Ted Geisel. Ted liked Gray because he had a great sense of humor, but he was more interested in Audrey for different reasons. It's little Ted, and I want to come in. I want to get to know you, dear Audrey, both outside and in. Little Ted doesn't care that we're married, doesn't think with that head. He only wants you naked, dear Audrey, and with him in bed. The DeMonds often picked up the Geisels, drove them to parties in town, or the couples would spend time together at the tower. And Ted was attracted to Audrey because of her silly nature and bubbly personality, but let's be fucking real. Also because she was very fit, had a great figure, much younger than him, and they had some chemistry. Helen could sense something was going on between the two. How sad for her. And she told their friend Judith Morgan, whose husband served on community boards with Ted, I don't know how it happened, but suddenly we 4 have to go everywhere together. On top of the stress of her suspicions, and perhaps in part because of them, Helen's health would start to decline again in 1965, and now she feared she was going blind. And then on March 24th, 1967, in the midst of all this, Ted is pulled over in San Diego after a police officer sees him change lanes 3 times. He's arrested, taken to city jail, and he fails his sobriety test with a blood alcohol content level of 0.13. He's released. The incident did not cause much damage to his reputation, beyond a few headlines with titles like, Dr. Seuss was soused. Not bad. Helen Geisel celebrated her 69th birthday, September 23rd, 1967. And in an effort to revive their marriage, which was now rocky, Ted and Helen go on an extended vacation in Colorado. Ted will bring with him 3 kilos of Viagra, a 50-gallon steel drum of industrial-strength lube, 2 giant suitcases of sex toys. He'll work with a contractor to have a sex swing installed in the home they've rented. A special vinyl covering will be added to the floor and walls. 10 different sizes of dildos will be mounted on the floor and those walls. The room had black lights, fans, heaters, dozen shower heads, and a small lap pool with a wave machine. Ted had professional sex workers, men and women both, flown in from Thailand, Nigeria, Brazil, Germany, and Kansas. He had, quote, professionally trained sex monkeys brought up from Panama. He had an entire Cirque du Soleil troupe of contortionists and acrobats brought in from Las Vegas. He physically prepped for a month with a special yoga instructor from India. Had 2 of his ribs removed. Had 3 inches added to his penis by the best cosmetic surgeon in Beverly Hills. He had his nutsack reshaped to make it smoother, more symmetrical, and more attractive. Had it resized to provide a more appealing visual. He experimented with LSD and spent 2 weeks living as a power bottom in West Hollywood to become more open and comfortable with different sexual experiences, but it still wasn't enough. Teddy tried it all. He even had a dominatrix stomp on his balls. He gathered up lube, he shaved his pubes. He sucked on both Dick and Jane's boobs. He tried the bottom and he tried the top. Ted did everything he could to make that pussy pop. But in the end, it wasn't enough, even when he dressed up like the gimp. Helen's kitty was still dry, and little Ted was still limp. Okay, back to reality now. I need a little silliness before this gets so sad. Following the Colorado vacation, where their romance was clearly, sadly, tragically not rekindled, the couple returns to La Jolla in mid-October and resumes socializing with their friends, and then just days later, Helen Geisel died of suicide. October 23rd, 1967. She went to bed around 11 p.m. the night before. Ted was up late that night working on his book, The Foot Book, until 2 a.m. At that point, he went to sleep in his own bedroom. The couple's housekeeper, Alberta Shaw, arrived for work at 10 a.m. the morning of the 23rd. The house was locked and quiet, which was unusual because Helen was at least normally up at that time. But Helen's bedroom door was closed. When Shaw cracked open the door after knocking and hearing no answer, she found Helen in bed and a half-empty bottle of sodium pentobarbital tablets on her nightstand, along with a handwritten note. Helen's note read as follows, and this is so sad. Dear Ted, what has happened to us? I don't know. I feel myself in a spiral going down, down, down into a black hole from which there is no escape, no brightness. And loud in my ears from every side I hear, failure, failure, failure. I love you so much. I am too old and enmeshed in everything you do and are that I cannot conceive of life without you. My going will leave quite a rumor, but you can say I was overworked and overwrought. Your reputation will not be harmed. Sometimes, think of the fun we had through the years. God damn. Imagine getting a suicide note like that from your spouse. Ooh, the pain you would feel knowing how much pain you would cause them, whether you had done so intentionally or not, or consciously or not, whether it was actually your fault in some way or not. But the guilt, the fucking guilt, and so sad she had dedicated her life to his life for so long. She could not imagine spending her final years alone if he were to leave her. And she must have known he had one foot out the door, that one line, I am too old and enmeshed in everything you do and are, that I cannot conceive of life without you. Ooh, that must have stabbed Ted right in the heart. Ted said about the loss of his wife, I didn't know whether to kill myself, burn the house down, or just go away and get lost. Well, he wouldn't do any of those. Throughout the following winter of 1967 going into 1968, Ted was highly aware of the gossip about him and Audrey. There was a lot of speculation that Helen had taken her life primarily because of an ongoing affair between Ted and Audrey. Sounds like, she probably had done that. If Ted ever felt partially responsible for her death, he never said so, and Audrey never said so either. Audrey believed her relationship with Ted was inevitable. She once said, he fell in love. I have to feel that in the big picture, it was meant to happen. In the spring of 1968, Ted informed a crew of scheduled contractors working on his home that there had been a change in plans. The architect learned that Audrey was now living at the tower, just 6 months following Helen's death, and that she was now in charge of the remodel. Weeks prior, Audrey informed her husband that, quote, something was lacking, and she was moving to Reno long enough, to the day, just long enough, to meet the residency requirements so she could legally file for divorce. Gray DeMond, her husband, is shocked, but when he realized his wife was leaving him, he knew immediately who she was leaving him for. And apparently all he asked of her was that she not get into a car with Ted if he was driving. Seriously, because as we mentioned earlier, he was notoriously that bad of a driver, which is so fucking funny and also so sad. Baby, I love you. Please don't leave me. Don't leave me and the girls. What if you must? Promise me this. You will never get into a car with that man when he's behind the wheel. I know you love him, but he's a fucking menace. Ted told a friend around this time, my best friend is being divorced, and I'm going to Reno to comfort his wife. Not a good look. Man, how messy. At 64 years old, Ted fucks his best friend's wife behind his back, has an affair with his best friend's wife that upsets his own wife to the point that she took her own life. Not the final chapter I expected from Dr. Seuss, I gotta say. And I know, no one's perfect. Didn't expect Ted to be perfect. I didn't expect this either. Definitely my least favorite part of the story. Ted wrote to a friend in late May, let me put it out flat on the line, without any comment or begging for understanding. On the 21st of June, Audrey DeMond is going to Reno to divorce Gray DeMond. Audrey and I are going to be married about the first week in August. I'm acquiring 2 daughters, ages 9 and 14. I am rebuilding the house to take care of the influx. I am 64 years old. I am marrying a woman 18 years younger. This is not a sudden, nutty decision. This is an inevitable, inescapable conclusion to 5 years of 4 people's frustration. All I can ask is you try to believe in me. Well, I guess you never know what goes on behind closed doors, as they say. Maybe these 4 had been pretty miserable in their respective marriages for years. Biographer Brian J. Jones quoted Audrey as saying, it would have been nice if we'd met and married earlier, but the feeling was that at his age, you grab for the gusto, you don't wait, you don't think you have much time. As planned, Audrey checked into a hotel in Reno, June 21st, 1968. Weeks later, August 5th, Ted and Audrey are married at the Washoe County I was going to say, that was a weird Freudian slip. I started to say the Washoe County whorehouse instead of courthouse. All right, subconscious, fucking tell them how you feel. Audrey then not only left her husband, she sent her daughters to a boarding school. Why? She didn't think they would be happy with Ted. Ted wouldn't have been happy with them. She later said, Ted's a hard man to break down, but this is who he was. He had lived his whole life without children, and he was very happy without children. And she maybe didn't do this. I will add right now. She said that in numerous sources. This comes up that she sent her kids to boarding school immediately. And I was like, what the fuck? And then Audrey admitted she herself had never been very maternal. There were too many other things I wanted to do, she said. My life with him was what I wanted my life to be. However, as the years passed, Ted would develop a close relationship with Audrey's daughters, who maybe were not treated as I first thought when I read that stuff about boarding school and divorce. Thankfully, in January of 2019, following her mom's death in late 2018, Audrey's youngest daughter, Leah Legray, did an interview to combat the narrative that her mom did not want her around and that her stepdad did not want her around either. She wanted to clear up this long-standing misconception and set the record straight. And she said, my mother died 1 month ago tomorrow, and it has been devastating for me. The slant towards her in the media. I felt my family has been disfigured and my past rewritten, my happy past. She recounted how her mom called her after speaking to the New York Times in 2000 and regretted making some comments. She added, I can't explain why my mom said some of the things she said. And I can't explain why she said those things about the family. It's simply not true. I was not sent away. I had a very strong family life with Mom and Ted. I can never say enough good things about Ted. He was loving, kind, fun, and wonderful. At no time was this man the man who would send away a 9-year-old. Audrey Geisel had given 2 interviews in which she described herself as not maternal and Ted as not wanting her kids around, right? Prompting conversations with her youngest daughter, Lark Gray. Damon said, quote, we talked about that and she stopped it. And then she added, my mom wasn't June Cleaver. She was Audrey Geisel. She wasn't baking cookies. She was doing her own thing, but she was a wonderful mom for me. Damon said she briefly attended boarding school 5 years later at the age of 14, but spent her childhood like many children of divorced parents, mostly shuttling back and forth between 2 homes, which were 2 loving homes. Said she divided her time between her father, cardiologist, E. Gray Diamond, or Damon. God, I want to say fucking Diamond because it's a weird spelling. It's Dimond. 1 fucking letter away from Diamond. In Kansas City, Missouri, and the Geisels in La Jolla. And she said she had a lot of nice things to say about, she had a lot of nice things to say about Ted that she certainly never needed to say. Like Ted Geisel should never be seen as a cold, self-absorbed, selfish man. I adore Ted, or adored. He was the very center of my life. I knew him since the age of 2, and he became my step-pop when I was 9. She recalled her time with Geisel as being full of peace and serenity. He worked in the house, and I was always with him, she said. There was no door to his studio. It opened to the house. He'd make you little things, draw you little pictures, and drop them on you as he walked past you, because I was always on the floor reading. He would make me montages and collages. When I look at my years with Ted, there was a sensation of peace. It was heaven. My mom created a beautiful household for us, and Ted was the center of my life. And my pop was a wonderful pop. There was never any estrangement. So I'm very glad that she gave that interview. Without it, anyone researching Ted's life would have thought very differently about him as a parent based on other sources. After her marriage to Ted, for the rest of her life, Audrey would be heavily involved in running Ted's business affairs, and then she would work hard to preserve his legacy after his death. She would later work on the films The Lorax, Horton Hears, and the made-for-TV Seuss movie Daisy Head Maisie. But now let's return to earlier in the timeline. In 1971, Ted published The Lorax, a book that warned about the dangers of mistreating the environment. The book came out before environmentalism was a popular movement. Here's a little excerpt. Catch, calls the onceler. He lets something fall. It's a truffula seed. It's the last one of all. You're in charge of the last of the truffula seeds, and truffula trees are what everyone needs. Plant a new truffula, treat it with care. Give it clean water and feed it fresh air. Grow a forest protected from axes that hack. Then the Lorax and all of his friends may come back. Ted called books like The Grinch and The Lorax his big books. The New Yorker wrote that these moralistic books have become fables for the modern age. The Cat in the Hat and Sam I Am have taught generations of children to read, but the likes of The Grinch and The Lorax have guided their thinking and feeling. In early 1983, Ted signed the biggest merchandise deal of his career. It was a 10-year contract with Colco, the manufacturer of the Cabbage Patch Kids. Colco offered Geisel $10 million to market Dr. Seuss plush toys and video games. Oh, fuck yeah. Ted wasn't sure he wanted to spend the final years of his life doing merchandising, but he signed the deal on the condition that he would get final approval of all products. But also he signed it because who doesn't want an extra $10 million? You fucking kidding me? Especially back in 1983 when 10 mil was the equivalent of what 32 mil would be today. To get that on top of whatever he was making selling books, which is a lot. Oh my God. Sadly, the day after signing that agreement, Ted, who was now 79 years old, went for a routine dental checkup, and the dentist found small cancerous lesions at the base of his tongue, the result of 60 years of smoking. The doctor recommended surgery to remove the affected area of his tongue, which Ted was not willing to do. He instead went to the University of California Medical Center in San Fran for a second opinion. There, doctors confirmed the cancer diagnosis and recommended a radiation treatment followed by iridium transplant at the base of his tongue to kill the cancer cells. Ted also rejected that treatment. He didn't want his hair to fall out. He talked to Audrey, agreed to a compromise. He would let the doctors excise the cancer without removing a big portion of his tongue and would have an iridium implant inserted near the site of the lesions. He went into surgery February 14th, 1983, told Audrey, he and Audrey told no one that he had cancer. Months later, December 16th, 1983, Ted underwent a radical neck dissection and deep biopsy to remove the rest of the cancer, which had now spread to one of his lymph nodes. Meanwhile, he just kept working. In 1984, he published the Butter Battle book, which discussed the arms buildup and threat of nuclear war during the Reagan administration. The book is about the Ukes and the Zooks, who live on opposite sides of a long, curving wall. The Ukes wear blue clothes, the Zooks wear orange. The primary dispute between the two cultures is that the Ukes eat their bread with the butter side up, while the Zooks, those fucking savages, eat their bread with the butter side down. Kill them all! The conflict between the two sides leads to an escalating arms race, which results in the threat of mutually assured destruction. Here's how it ends. Grandpa leapt up the wall with a lopulous leap, and he cleared his hoarse throat with a bopulous beep. He screamed, "Here's the end of that terrible town full of Zooks who eat bread with the butter side down." And at that very instant, we heard a clup-clup of feet on the wall, and old Vantage clupped up. The boys in his back room had made him one too. In his fist was another big boy boomaroo. "I'll blow you," he yelled, "into pork and wee beans. I'll butter side up you to small smithereens." "Grandpa," I shouted, "be careful, oh gee. Who's going to drop it, will you or will he?" "Be patient," said Grandpa, "we'll see. We will see." Love how he was making fun of how tribal and illogical we humans truly are in his kids' books, which were just so much more delightfully subversive than I realized. That same year, Ted won the Pulitzer Prize for his special contribution over nearly half a century to the education and enjoyment of America's children and their parents. In addition to his Academy Award-winning works, Ted also won 3 Emmys over the course of his life, the Laura Ingalls Wilder Medal, and a Peabody Broadcasting Award. 1986, at the age of 82, Ted published You're Only Old Once, a book for obsolete children. A book centered on aging, a picture book for adults. So this is his second adult book. His first book for adults in 47 years. The book follows an elderly man on a visit to the Golden Years Clinic where he endures long waits and bizarre medical tests. You're Only Old Once was written shortly after Geisel had suffered through a series of illnesses, during which he spent a considerable amount of time in hospital waiting rooms. To pass the time, he began sketching images of hospital machines and scenes of medical procedures. How cool to be in a fucking room with this guy while he's doing that. He later began to work those ideas into a book. Geisel quipped that he was fed up with a social life consisting entirely of doctors. Man, here's an excerpt. "For your pill drill, you'll go to room 663, where a voice will instruct you, repeat after me. This small white pill is what I munch at breakfast and right after lunch. I take the pill that's Kelly Green before each meal and in between. These loganberry-colored pills I take for early morning chills. I take the pill with zebra stripes to cure my early evening gripes. These orange-tinted ones, of course, I take to cure my Charlie horse. I take 3 blues at 8:30 to slow my exhalation rate. On alternate nights at 9 p.m., I swallow pinkies, 4 of them. The reds which make my eyebrows strong, I eat like popcorn all day long. The speckled browns are what I keep beside my bed to help me sleep. This long, flat one is what I take if I should die before I wake." It's fucking great. Ted's final book, Oh, the Places You'll Go, was published a year before he died in 1990. Oh, the Places You'll Go has become a popular graduation gift for both high school and college students. The book is about the journey of life, its challenges and joys. And here are the final verses. "And will you succeed? Yes, you will indeed. 98 3/4% guaranteed. Kid, you'll move mountains. So be your name Buxom or Bixby or Bray or Mordecai Ali Van Allen O'Shea, you're off to great places. Today is your day. Your mountain is waiting, so get on your way." That's beautiful. Ted still wasn't yet ready for retirement after finishing this book. After writing Oh, the Places You'll Go, he started working on a screenplay for a planned feature movie version of the book. And in July of 1991, at the age of 87, Ted published a 1-volume collection of some of his earlier works titled Six by Seuss. Ted also did one of his final interviews in the summer of 1991. It was a written interview. He was asked if he wanted to share a moral message with his readers that hadn't yet been included in his books. And he wrote, "Any message or slogan Whenever things go a bit sour in a job I'm doing, I always tell myself, you can do better than this. The best slogan I can think of to leave with the kids of the USA would be, we can, and we've got to, do better than this. And then Ted crossed out the word kids and said, I no longer write for children, I write for people. In early September of 1991, Ted told his secretary he was done signing books. He accepted he was dying of cancer and refused any more cancer treatments. He decided he wanted to die at home in the tower, his home of so many years. Then a few weeks later, Ted Geisel did die in his sleep, September 24th, 1991, at the age of 87. On his deathbed, he was asked if he had any final thoughts to share with the world, and he responded, quote, let me think about it. I truly hope he intended for those to be his final words, that he wanted to end on a cliffhanger. His official cause of death was oral cancer. Dr. Seuss's legacy has remained strong in the decades after his death. In 1993, Audrey Geisel founded Dr. Seuss Enterprises to protect and promote her husband's intellectual property and benefit charitable organizations. 1995, the University of California, San Diego renamed its main library in honor of Ted Geisel. 1997, the Art of Dr. Seuss collection was launched. Limited edition prints and sculptures of Ted's artwork could now be found at galleries alongside the works of Rembrandt, Pablo Picasso, and others. That same year, the National Education Association partnered with Dr. Seuss Enterprises to launch a youth literacy initiative called Read Across America. March 2nd, Ted's birthday became National Read Across America Day. The celebration has been held on or near his birthday ever since. 1999, over 200 of Ted's political cartoons were collected and published by history professor Richard H. Manier. Old Dick Manier in the book Dr. Seuss Goes to War. In 2015, Random House Children's Books published a new undiscovered Seuss book titled What Pet Should I Get? Audrey had discovered Ted's manuscripts and sketches in their home in 2013. There have since been additional posthumous publications such as the Bipolo Seed and Other Lost Stories in 2011 and Horton and the Quagger Bug and More Lost Stories in 2014. Audrey Geisel passed away herself December 19th, 2018 in La Jolla at the age of 97. And with that, let's hop out of this timeline that has been a lifeline to help me wrap my head around the guidelines of Dr. Seuss's literary skyline.
Good job, soldier. You made it back. Barely.
Theodore Seuss Geisel, Dr. Seuss. How fun was it to revisit some of his most widely read books? Was it a nice trip down memory lane? Do you feel deprived if you never got to read any of his books growing up? Well, it's never too late to start. If you want to check out some of his books and are low on funds, you can go to anyflip.com. Just ANYFLIP, anyflip.com, where you can read most of his books with accompanying illustrations for free. Read them for yourself, read them to your kid. No need to reach for the bookshelf, heaven forbid. You just need the internet, which you already use. It's how you got this podcast, so you have no excuse. Jump into the imagination of one of the best. Ted wasn't perfect, but who is? I have no guess. His books don't just help you read, they help you think. And for that, there will always be a need, nudge, nudge, wink, wink. But seriously, how fun. What a cool life he led. I mean, I really don't like how things ended with his first wife, but I can separate the art from the artist and still appreciate his catalog. However, we still have one thing I've yet to address. So to the takeaways we go to discuss what can you guess?
Timesuck. Top 5 takeaways.
Number 1, Ted Geisel, a.k.a. Dr. Seuss, came from a family of German immigrants who settled in Springfield, Massachusetts. The Geisel family grew their wealth and developed a strong reputation through a successful local brewery. Number 2, although he was famous for his colorful and unique drawings, Ted never formally studied art. Not really. He took one art class. Didn't even finish it. Number 3, Ted first used the pen name Seuss, which is his middle name, after he was fired as editor of his college humor magazine for drinking. He continued using the name Seuss throughout his career, later added the doctor as a reference to his unfinished graduate studies. Number 4, Geisel's first book, And to Think That I Saw It on Mulberry Street, was rejected 27 times in a row. Ted gave up on his dream of publishing a children's book until he had a chance encounter with an old friend who worked for Vanguard Press, his first publisher. And number 5, new info, Dr. Seuss canceled? On March 2nd, 2021, Dr. Seuss Enterprises announced that 6 of his books would no longer be published due to insensitive imagery. Dr. Seuss Enterprises released the following statement. Today on Dr. Seuss's birthday, Dr. Seuss Enterprises celebrates reading and also our mission of supporting all children and families with messages of hope, inspiration, inclusion, and friendship. We are committed to action. To that end, Dr. Seuss Enterprises, working with a panel of experts, including educators, reviewed our catalog of titles and made the decision last year to cease publication and licensing of the following titles. And to think that I saw it on Mulberry Street. If I Ran the Zoo, Mick Elligott's Pool, On Beyond Zebra, Scrambled Egg Super, and The Cat's Quizzer. These books portray people in ways that are hurtful and wrong. Ceasing sales of these books is only part of our commitment and broader plan to ensure Dr. Seuss Enterprises' catalog represents and supports all communities and families. Well, there were mixed reactions to this announcement, to say the least. Both support and outrage. The New York Times reported the announcement seemed to drive a surge of support for Seuss classics. Dozens of Dr. Seuss books quickly moved to the top of Amazon's print bestseller list. Many wanted to grab copies before they were gone. The statement made headlines and led to complaints about cancel culture, particularly from conservative figures. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy posted a video of himself on YouTube reading Green Eggs and Ham the day after the announcement. Tucker Carlson, host for Fox News at the time, criticized cancel culture and said it was demented to pull these Seuss books, adding, "If we lose this battle, America is lost." That guy loves hyperbole. Ben Shapiro tweeted, "We've now got foundations book burning the authors to whom they are dedicated. Well done, everyone." President Joe Biden dropped Dr. Seuss altogether from Read Across America Day. Feels like a pretty knee-jerk reaction to me, based more in political optics than reason, perhaps, but that's just my opinion. There's a lot of opinions out there, still out there, about all this. The New York Times wrote, "The estate's decision represents a dramatic step to update and curate Seuss's body of work, acknowledging and rejecting some of his views while seeking to protect his brand and appeal. It also raises questions about whether and how an author's work should be posthumously curated to reflect evolving social attitudes and what should be preserved as part of the cultural record." Philip Nell, a children's lit scholar and author of Dr. Seuss, American Icon, told the Times, "It will cause people to reevaluate the legacy of Dr. Seuss, and I think that's a good thing. There are parts of his legacy one should honor, and parts of his legacy that one should not. They may be motivated by the fact that racism is bad for the brand, or they may be motivated by a deeper sense of racial justice." Ebony Elizabeth Thomas, associate professor at the University of Pennsylvania Graduate School of Education, told the Times, "Folks are not remembering the text itself. They are remembering the affective experiences they had around those texts. White children or parents might not have noticed the offensive anti-Asian stereotyping in Mulberry Street. In recent decades, librarians and scholars have pushed to reevaluate classic children's books that contain stereotypes and caricatures. For example, books like Tintin and Babar, I never know how you say that elephant's name, Babar, B-A-B-R, have been accused of promoting colonialism and imperialism and have been withdrawn from some libraries following criticism of how non-white characters are depicted. Some authors have edited their works in response to criticisms. Some books have been taken out of circulation altogether, such as Tintin in the Congo. That book no longer widely available in the U.S. During his lifetime, Ted had issued an apology for some of his political cartoons and said they were the result of snap judgments that every political cartoonist has to make. Others have pointed out anti-Semitic or Islamophobic overtones in his comics and ads in his later career. In his book Was the Cat in the Hat Black? The Hidden Racism of Children's Literature and the Need for Diverse Books, scholar Philip Nell makes the case that the character has roots in blackface minstrelsy. Oh my God, minstrelsy. Not a word often said aloud. Blackface minstrel. Oh my God, minstrelsy. There we go. In 2019, a journal dedicated to the study of diversity in children's lit published a paper titled "The Cat is Out of the Bag: Orientalism, Anti-Blackness, and White Supremacy in Dr. Seuss's Children's Books." Yee. Authors argued that much of Geisel's work exhibits racism or bias against Black, Asian, Mexican, Native American, Jewish people, women, other groups. Authors wrote, minimizing, erasing, or not acknowledging Seuss's racial transgressions across his entire publishing career deny the very real historical impact they've had on people of color and the way that they continue to influence culture, education, and children's views of people of color. Philip Bump, a national columnist for the Washington Post, wrote in March of 2021, "If Dr. Seuss's profile wanes a bit as a result of the attention being paid to his drawings, the only form of canceling at play here, to whom is harm being done? The answer, of course, is people who perceive criticism of the casual racism of the past as criticism of their own behavior, or as a reminder of how the world around them is changing." A lot of strong opinions, a lot of definitive opinions about a subjective thing here. Ultimately, the estate's decision did not have much effect on the overall success of Dr. Seuss sales. Dr. Seuss continues to outsell other books in children and adult categories. In 2022, it was reported that Dr. Seuss was the #1 literary license in the U.S. by print sales, according to data from NPD BookScan, meaning he sold more copies than any other IP-based books in both children and adult titles. Okay, so where exactly did all this outrage come from? Mostly from what I can tell, and just reading in other sources that I haven't referenced here, mostly based, for most people being upset, in how Dr. Seuss illustrated specifically Japanese characters. And I gotta say, I may be unpopular opinion, but I don't agree personally with this criticism, and I'll explain why. I think a lot of his critics overlooked the fact that his illustration style was based in caricature, just across the board. Anyone who's ever seen any of Dr. Seuss's illustrations, who also has a basic understanding of the art of caricature, should, in my opinion, be able to tell immediately that, he exaggerated the features of all his people and creatures for comical effect, right? The very definition of caricature is a picture, description, or imitation of a person in which certain striking characteristics are exaggerated in order to create a comic of grotesque effect. When I see a Dr. Seuss illustration of a little blonde white girl, for example, I see somebody whose big blue eyes have been made so much bigger, like ridiculously cartoonishly so, because that's how caricatures work. When I see an old Dr. Seuss illustration of somebody who is Japanese, their comparatively smaller eyes are now much, much smaller. So is that, just in and of itself, inherently racist? While I am not an expert, I don't think so. I don't think this was like overt racism. And I'm not saying people shouldn't have complaints, right? We should all be able to wait on this. But for me, like in old political cartoons, did Dr. Seuss lean on racial stereotypes about the Japanese? Yes, he did. But did he do the same thing for Hitler's Germans? Did he do the same thing for Mussolini's Italians? Oh, he sure did. They all had various ethnic features grossly exaggerated. Was anybody outraged by Ted's depiction of Germans or Italians? Not from what I can tell. Was there a lot of outrage specifically about Japanese depictions? Yeah, and most of it 70 years later. And that to me is just, that inconsistency is where it gets a little ridiculous for me. While racism is certainly very, very real, and while racism in this country certainly exists and always has, I find certain accusations of racism in cases like this not as heavy as others, I guess maybe is the most diplomatic way to say it. I find the way many of us choose to single out some behavior as racist and ignore other, from my perspective, pretty identical behavior to be a little absurd. And here's an example of what I mean. Just a few weeks ago, Zany's Comedy Club in Nashville, Lindsay and I are hanging out with 3 Jewish friends. One wanted us to all share our best street jokes. Ironically, for somebody who's toured as a comic for over 20 years, I have a fucking terrible memory for street jokes. And I just never really cared about them, to be honest. I'm much more likely to roll my eyes than laugh at a street joke. Sorry, street joke lovers. Only one I can consistently ever remember is the first street joke I was ever told. A joke about 2 Polish hunters that my grandpa Ward told me when I was probably like 8 years old. And one that definitely plays on racial stereotypes about Polish people. Not being smart and being very gullible. Before telling it, one of our Jewish friends said something to the effect of, I would ask Lindsay if she's okay with this, but since she's Polish, she won't understand what we're saying anyway. And Lindsay laughed. And probably because you're wondering what joke, I'll tell a truncated version. It's not a good joke. I'm going to preface it saying it's not that funny of a joke. But the joke is 2 Polish hunters go out in the woods and one starts not feeling well. And they go to make camp. And then when it's time to hunt, the one who's not feeling well is just like, you know what? Go ahead and hunt without me. I'm going to stay here and just see if I can, get feeling better and maybe take a little nap. So he takes a nap. The other guy goes, gets a deer, brings it back, and he sees that the guy is asleep. He decides to play a joke on him. He takes all the guts out of the deer and he pushes the guts ridiculously under the sleeping Polish hunter, the other one. Then he leaves to go hunt more. Then he comes back and his previously not feeling good friend is up, he's awake, and he's making a stew with the deer meat. And he seems great. And the guy's surprised. And he goes, hey, man, how you feeling? And the guy's like, oh, man, I'm doing great, but I was very sick. You're not going to believe this. But when I took a nap, I woke up to realize I had shit all my guts out. But with the help of this trusty stick, I got them all back in. And that's it. Just a stupid joke about somebody who just shoves fucking deer guts up their ass because they think that's normal to do. No one was upset. But what if I would have told a Jewish joke based on stereotypes about Jewish people having all the money or controlling Hollywood or this alleged love of gold? Well, I think our Jewish friends there would have still laughed because they have fucked up sense of humor like I do. But I strongly feel that other Jewish people might be very offended. Not all, but some. So why is it worse to make a Jewish joke than a Polish joke? Similarly, why is it worse to make a Japanese joke based on stereotypes than it is to make, let's say, a German joke? Is it because the Japanese have historically been the victims of more discrimination and prejudice than the Germans here in America? I think on the surface, that's how we justify it. But does that make sense when you really analyze it? Can we make fun of a group of people because they've only been mocked or disenfranchised a bit, as if there's an acceptable level of prejudice? Imagine if I joked the same way about the Japanese language in the way that I have about the Italian language on this podcast. I fucking promise you, I would lose listeners. I would get angry emails. I might even lose sponsors. Might be dropped by my ad agency altogether if I did the Japanese version as a white dude of Maserati Bugatti Spaghetti, right? But is that fair? Does that actually make sense? Just like I'm not Japanese, I'm also not Italian. But if I was Asian, say Filipino, could I then make fun of an Asian accent based in a country where I'm not from and not draw the ire of almost anyone? Oh yeah, I think so. If I was Filipino, could I make fun of the Italian language? Yes, again, I think so based on watching a lot of stand-up comedy for so long. But if I was Italian, while I could make fun of the Italian language, I could not make fun of the Japanese language. And I just say all of this to illustrate that sometimes racism is very obvious. But there are also unspoken rules when it comes to racism that are not very obvious and that are wildly subjective. And the interpretation of each of these rules varies considerably from person to person, right? What amounts to evidence of someone being racist based on anecdotal evidence from my own life experience varies tremendously from person to person. And based on this subjectiveness, I personally don't think Dr. Seuss was at least overtly racist. And therefore, there would be no need to cancel him posthumously, which actually hasn't been done, by the way. You can still find all the books if you want to, at least in ebook form. And I will add, I could be wrong, right? I could be wrong about this. I'm just one person. I'm a white dude in a country where white dudes have had it pretty good making this opinion. If the drawings upset you or you're worried that they will upset your children, well, then don't read them. Other than the Sneetches, everyone should read the fucking Sneetches. The Sneetches does a great job of showing how silly racism truly is. And look, would a true racist, back when no one was calling him racist, really write such a book? Perhaps some of us mistook what he drew in his books. Perhaps we can overlook what might have been an innocent mistake and not get so shook.
Timesuck Top 5 Takeaways.
Dr. Seuss has been sucked. Thank you to the Bad Magic Productions team for helping making Timesuck again. Thanks to Queen of Bad Magic, Lindsay Cummins. Thanks to Logan Keith producing, helping get this episode polished and put out. Thanks also to Olivia Lee for the initial research she did this week. And thanks to the All Seeing Eyes moderating the cult of the Curious private Facebook page, the Mod Squad making sure Discord runs smooth, and everybody at the Timesuck subreddit and Bad Magic subreddit. So many fantastic sacks doing so much for this community. And now let's head on over to this week's Timesucker updates.
Updates? Get your Timesucker updates.
First up, solid meat sack, David. Just gonna go with first name. Sending a message to Bojangles at timesuckpodcast.com with the subject line of Russian cyber war episode. Hello, Mr. Cummins, bearer of the mighty leash of Bojangles and made-up catchphrase guru. I've been listening for some time to Timesuck ever since I heard about this podcast on Spotify from one of my favorite comedians. For the first 3 years, I think I listened to every episode. What is Big Deal? I like Timesuck. As of late, I haven't listened to all of the serial killer episodes. That has nothing to do with the quality of the podcast. I'm just trying to be a more positive person, and listening to other people's pain hurts more than it used to. Oh, yeah. Okay, I get that. I'm sorry that this is going to be a long email. You probably won't even get to it, which is completely fine. Oh, you're so wrong. However, I just wanted to give my 2 cents on the situation in Russia. First, I need to tell you why my opinion matters even a tiny bit. From the time I was 14 years old, I wanted to serve in the army and fight the Soviet Union. To that end, I started learning all I could about them. Then the wall came down and things started to change, but I went ahead with my plans anyway. The plans changed again, as they always do, when I was called to serve a mission for my church in Russia in 1994. The Russian people often refer to these years as the bad 90s. I was in town in the middle of Russia called Saratov. I stood in bread lines and toilet paper lines and lines for anything else that I needed. However, I found myself loving the people of Russia. I found them to be hardworking, brutally honest, and they loved their families. After spending 2 years there on my mission and then another 8 months there on my own, I came home and joined the Army. As you know, Special Forces units in the Army have a target country, and mine was Russia. I still have dozens of manuals from this military sitting on my bookshelf on how to fight the Russian Army. I could go on about this, but I just wanted to give you a kind of a basic rundown. So I really like the episode on Russia's cyber war, and of course it's all very true. However, you, like almost everyone, refer to the Russian government as the Russians. And I found that people cannot separate the people of the country from the government of the country. As you correctly said, the Russian people have endured 100 years of propaganda, and yet they still see through a lot of it. They still genuinely believe that it is in everyone's best interest for the U.S. and Russia to have good relations. However, there has been so much propaganda in the U.S. against Russia that I do not feel like the citizens of this nation feel the same. My own sister, this is so funny, who admittedly is not the sharpest tool in the shed, teaches her children that Russia and Russians are a terrible place and that they shouldn't even bother trying to learn about their culture or language. Russian history is filled with good people doing great things. Stanislav Petrov, Vasily Arkhipov, Alexei Ananenko, Valery Bespalov, Boris Bernov, just to name a few. I wonder if you could maybe do a short suck on something good from Russia. I just know that you're a person who believes that everyone should be good citizens of the world and care about each other. And I know that the people of Russia, a lot of them, are those kind of people. Thanks for all you do, and please, please keep butchering Russian words and names. I love it. Seriously, though, if you ever want some pronunciation guides on words, I'd be happy to do that, David. Well, David, thank you for the offer, and thanks for the kind words. And you bring up a very fair point. The Russian government and the Russian people are, of course, two different bodies of people. I doubt the Russian government represents the hearts and minds of the average Russian citizen any more than the U.S. government represents the hearts and minds of many of us. Definitely not me. And yeah, that's a great suggestion. I should try and find a positive story set in Russia. Still flying by the seat of my pants most weeks here, but I will try and remember to find time to find that story. I do feel terrible for the people of Russia, actually. They've endured so much. First, centuries of mistreatment under the czars, then over 70 years of hell with communism, and now a bunch more bullshit under whatever the fuck Putin's regime is. Thank you again, and thank you for your service. Next, Smart Sack, Katrina Whittier, sent in a message with the subject line of "Kids are badass." Hi, Dan. I wanted to send over a short video in follow-up to your Russian episode. Great work, my guy. Did you know that kids in Finland start learning about how to spot fake news and disinformation started in pre-K? I did not know that. Here's a short video if you want to learn more. I thought the ending really wrapped up with information we could all benefit from hearing. It's a Finnish quote. "You have the right to your own opinion, but you don't have the right to your own facts." Anyway, thanks. Love you. Bye. Katrina. Katrina, that's a fucking great quote. You have the right to your own opinion, but you don't have the right to your own facts. That is so perfectly worded and so sadly extremely relevant to life today. And yes, let me play a bit of the beginning of the video that you sent me. This is pretty fascinating.
In this era of disinformation almost everywhere, a question. When it comes to identifying scams, hoaxes, and fake news, are you smarter than a fourth grader? The answer might surprise you, as Chris Livesay discovered.
To say that Finland values education is an understatement. No, that's not Finnish they're speaking. This is a Spanish class at a public elementary school in the capital, Helsinki. And yet their language proficiency is not the only thing that makes these fourth grade Finns so remarkable. At just 10 years old, they're already learning to separate fact.
Can you figure out which is the fake news?
From fiction. Today's assignment, let's find out if an alien really did land on Earth in the past decade.
For 2013.
Yep, they also speak English.
I don't think that there has been ever somebody who's seen an alien, so it's already fake because it says that it was 10 years ago in 2013 and still nobody has seen aliens ever.
So you're saying that if this happened 10 years ago, you probably would have heard about an alien.
Yes.
These kids are already pros. They've been at it since they were 6, and they'll keep sharpening their ability to spot hoaxes, avoid scams, and debunk propaganda throughout their education.
Man, I'm telling you, the Nordic countries are where it's at. Even though I disagree with that kid, it's probably been aliens. But I like what he's saying. I like what he's saying. If there was a definitive sighting, like proof, like positive proof that was undeniable, like we had a video of some fucking alien that was shot 10 years ago that all the scientists are like, hell yeah, that's not CGI. That's not fake. That's definitely an alien. It'd be the biggest news story of all time. But yeah, the Nordic countries are where it's at, We should truly be trying to emulate them in so many ways. I truly believe that truly smart people are not afraid to admit when they're wrong. They're not afraid to admit someone is doing something better than them, right? They want to learn from them. They will be humble enough to try to learn from them. And I wish we could be a smart country and a humble country in that way, right? A country that's not afraid to say, hey, look at that over there. Man, that's better. Let's not be arrogant. Let's be humble. Let's be curious. Let's learn and improve. So thank you, Katrina. That's very inspiring and hopeful. Man, it's just fucking, Jesus Christ, speaking at least 3 languages at 10 years old and learning critical thinking skills. I love your name, by the way, Katrina. That's a great name. Okay, one more. Sweet Sack Curtis Nivens sent in a message with the subject line of, hello, Dan and the amazing Bad Magic fam. I just finished the Mr. Rogers episode, and holy fuck, I didn't cry once, not one time. Nope, not me. You may not realize this, but Mr. Rogers and Timesuck are almost identical. One slight difference. You're a mushmouth, and Mr. Rogers was a hot, hard father daddy dripping in wool. Mr. Rogers taught us to be kids. We needed someone to guide us through the first difficult half of our lives. It's like the torch was passed to you for the race's last leg. Timesuck teaches us how to be adults in the same way. You feed our curiosity, teach us how to accept, agree to disagree, and most importantly, not give up and look after each other. Other similarities, you both sing to us and spark our imagination. I sometimes can't remember if Bojangles is a real dog. Then I remember, of course, he is. You both have puppets, but none of his puppets are very creepy like Woody. 2 Mr. Rogers facts. Korn has a song called Mr. Rogers on the Life is Peachy album. I forgot about that. I used to listen to that album a long time ago, many years ago. If I recall correctly, he wrote the song after a dream in which Mr. Rogers tried to kill him. And 2, Mr. Rogers would narrate himself feeding the fish each episode with I'm feeding the fish because of a letter he received from a young blind girl who was worried the fish were hungry. I am not sorry about the length or girth of this email. My doctor says it is perfectly normal. If you read this on the air, please give a shout out to 4 of the best humans I've ever known. My girlfriend, Leandra, and her husband, David, that listen to The Suck. My girlfriend, Catherine, who doesn't listen to The Suck yet, but she will come around. And my best friend, Davis, who doesn't listen yet either. Please say, fuck you, Davis. Join the fucking cult already before Curtis bangs your mommy. Hail Nimrod Curtis. P.S. Next time I trip the shrooms, I will watch Mr. Rogers and or re-listen to this episode. It'll be glorious. Oh man, watching Mr. Rogers on shrooms. I would probably have like this. I would cry, but be so happy. Curtis, thank you for taking the time to send in a message. That really made me feel good about what I do. I appreciate you more than you probably will know. And I love hearing that the reason that Mr. Rogers fed the fish was so that he said the words, I'm feeding the fish, was so that little girl would not worry about them starving. The man was a fucking angel. I have shit on cults so much, but if Mr. Rogers was around today and started a cult and asked me to join, oh, would I consider it? Thanks for the messages, everybody.
Next time, suckers. I needed that.
We all did.
Well, thank you for listening to another Bad Magic Productions podcast. Scared to Death and Timesuck each week. Short Sucks and Nightmare Fuel on the Timesuck and Scared to Death podcast feeds twice a month. Read something good this week. Maybe some Dr. Seuss this week. Maybe a daily affirmation. Maybe a quick poem or some useful information. Whatever helps your mind to keep on trucking. Whatever makes your soul want to keep on sucking.
Bad Magic Productions.
Was this episode everything you had hoped it would be? Did it make you want to go on a big reading or writing spree? Did you pay $5 a month to hear it, or did you get it for free? Did you shake your head and agree, or wish you could shake me out of a tree? However it hit you, I hope it made you want to look into how important it is to read, to write, to feed, to fight our minds so that we might create our own cat in the hat, something we make that leaves the world a better place than it was before there was of you a trace.